Hello and welcome back to another evening of shared stories and quiet company. Tonight we're doing something a little different. We're going to spend the next couple of hours walking through the entire Dexter saga, from the very first episode all the way through New Blood and beyond, but we're going to be looking at it through a very specific and honestly kind of hilarious lens. We're talking about every single time Dexter Morgan, supposedly one of the smartest serial killers in the history of television, did something unbelievably, face-palmingly stupid. Now, if you're not familiar with the show or you need a quick refresher, Dexter Morgan is a blood spatter analyst working for the Miami Metro Police Department. On the surface, he's a mild-mannered forensics guy who brings donuts to work and makes awkward small talk in the break room. Underneath all of that, though, he's a serial killer. But not just any serial killer. He only kills people who have gotten away with murder themselves. Rapists, child killers, mob hitmen, people who slip them through the cracks of the justice system. Dexter hunts them down, wraps them in plastic, slices their cheek to collect a drop of blood on a glass slide as a trophy, and then dismembers them and dumps the remains in the ocean. He learned all of this from his adoptive father, Harry Morgan, a respected Miami homicide detective who discovered Dexter's violent tendencies when he was a kid and, instead of turning him in, taught him a set of rules for how to kill without getting caught. That set of rules became known as the Code of Harry. The show premiered on Showtime back on October 1st, 2006, and ran for 8 seasons and 96 episodes before ending in September of 2013. Then it came back in 2021 with a 10-episode limited series called Dexter New Blood. And then there's Dexter Resurrection, which started airing in July of 2025, plus an announced prequel about the Trinity Killer. So this franchise just keeps going. And through all of it, across every season, every revival, every spin-off, Dexter Morgan keeps making decisions that should have gotten him caught about 15 minutes into the pilot episode. The man works inside a police station. He's surrounded by homicide detectives every single day. He supposedly has genius-level understanding of forensic science. And yet this guy leaves a trail of evidence behind him that would make a first-year criminology student wince. So that's what tonight is about. We're going to go through the whole thing season by season and talk about every boneheaded decision, every moment of catastrophic carelessness, and every time this brilliant forensic mind somehow forgot how evidence works. We'll cover the early seasons where the mistakes are subtle, the middle seasons where they get progressively worse, the final season where the writing itself seemed to lose the plot, and then the New Blood revival that tried to give Dexter the ending the original series fumbled. It's a long journey, so settle in, get comfortable, and don't worry about keeping up with every detail. The whole point of a video like this is that you can listen, absorb what you catch, and let the rest wash over you like background noise. If you enjoy what I do here and you want to support the channel, consider subscribing down below. But for now, get comfortable, settle in, and let's talk about how Dexter Morgan is simultaneously the smartest and the dumbest character on television. Let's start at the very beginning, because even in season 1, the red flags were everywhere. The very first thing we ever see Dexter do, literally in the opening minutes of the very first episode, is kill a man named Mike Donovan. Donovan was a pedophile and child murderer who had killed 3 boys named Corey Belanti, Tyler Cale, and Joe Bigelow. Dexter tracks him to a choir event, hides in the back seat of his car, puts a wire around his neck, and forces him to drive to a wooded area where Dexter had already dug up the graves of Donovan's victims. He confronts Donovan with the evidence, injects him with M99, which is an animal tranquilizer, wraps him in plastic, cuts his cheek to collect a blood slide, and then dismembers him with a power saw. Methodical, calculated. Exactly the kind of meticulous planning you'd expect from a genius serial killer. And then he dumps the body in the ocean near Bay Harbor using his personal boat, the Slice of Life. Now here's where things start to get dumb in a really fundamental way. This isn't just the first kill we see. This is how Dexter disposes of every single victim for years. The same boat, the same stretch of ocean, the same general area near Bay Harbor. dozens and dozens of bodies over what eventually becomes close to a decade of killing, all dumped in one concentrated location at the bottom of the ocean floor. For a forensic scientist, and I cannot stress this enough, this is breathtakingly stupid. Dexter understands better than almost anyone how evidence accumulates. He knows about ocean currents, tidal patterns, decomposition rates. He literally analyzes crime scenes for a living. And his grand plan for body disposal is to create a mass underwater graveyard in one spot, using the same boat, following the same route, on a semi-regular schedule. The whole ocean is right there. He owns the boat. He could vary his route even slightly. Go north one week, south the next. Farther out when the weather is clear. But no, same spot, every time. For years, it's like a bank robber who robs the same branch every Tuesday at noon and is somehow surprised when the police stake it out. And sure enough, this exact decision comes back to bite him in season 2, when a treasure hunter discovers the underwater body dump, and suddenly the entire city of Miami is hunting for someone the media dubs the Bay Harbor Butcher. The FBI gets involved. Frank Lundy, one of the most competent investigators in the show, sets up a task force. And the investigation is headquartered in the same building where Dexter works every day, all because he couldn't be bothered to rotate his dump sites. But the ocean dump site isn't even the dumbest recurring decision Dexter makes. That honor belongs to the Bloodslides. From that very first kill, Dexter establishes a ritual. He slices his victim's cheek with a scalpel, collects a single drop of blood on a glass microscope slide, and then stores the slide in a small wooden box. He keeps this box hidden inside the air conditioning unit of his apartment. Over the course of the series, this box fills up with dozens of slides, each one representing a murder victim, each one containing DNA evidence. Dexter is a forensic scientist. He spends his professional life analyzing biological evidence and explaining to detectives how blood and DNA connect perpetrators to crime scenes. And he keeps a box full of DNA trophies from his murder victims in his apartment, where his nanny has a key, where his girlfriend's intern boyfriend uses his computer, where his sister drops by unannounced all the time. The slides are sitting right there behind a removable air conditioning panel like some kind of serial killer advent calendar. These slides cause problems for Dexter over and over again throughout the series. In season 2, Sergeant Dokes steals them from Dexter's apartment and takes them to Haiti for analysis, and they end up being found in Dokes' car at the airport, which conveniently makes Dokes look like the Bay Harbor Butcher. In season 6, after Dexter kills Travis Marshall in a church, he literally forgets his blood slide at the scene. Just leaves it there. Lieutenant Lagerta finds it under a grate, and that single drop slide is what eventually leads her to reopen the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, which ultimately leads to her death. And then, in season 7, Deborah finds the entire blood slide collection spread out in Dexter's apartment alongside his kill tools, and confronts him point blank, asking if he's a serial killer, which he is, obviously. Even in New Blood, which takes place nearly a decade after the original series, Dexter can't help himself. When he kills Matt Caldwell in Iron Lake, he's been out of the game for almost 10 years, and what does he do? He takes 2 pieces of broken glass and makes an improvised blood slide. In his own shed, at his own cabin. He places the slide on Matt's chest as if it's some kind of offering, and then walks away from it. The blood slides are the single thread of evidence that almost every major investigation eventually tugs on. Dokes found them. LaGuerta found one. Deborah found the whole box. They are the smoking gun sitting in a wooden box hidden behind a panel that any visitor, maintenance worker, or curious child could accidentally discover. And Dexter does this voluntarily. Nobody made him start collecting trophies. Harry didn't teach him this. It's entirely self-imposed risk, born out of a compulsion that Dexter never seriously attempts to control until it's far too late. Speaking of things from season 1 that came back to haunt him, let's talk about Valerie Castillo. In the first season, Dexter targets Jorge and Valerie Castillo, a husband and wife team who had been smuggling Cuban migrants into the country and then murdering them. Dexter planned to kill Jorge, but when he arrived at the scene, Valerie was there too. He ends up killing both of them, but he's distracted. His mind is racing about Rita, about their relationship, about whether he can maintain a normal life. Because of that distraction, he doesn't properly dismember Valerie's body before dumping it in the ocean. This comes back to haunt him when Brian Moser, the ice truck killer, who also happens to be Dexter's biological brother, dives into the ocean and retrieves Valerie's body to mess with Dexter. The M99, that animal tranquilizer Dexter uses to knock out his victims, was still in Valerie's system, and it nearly got traced back to him. A planned kill by a supposedly meticulous killer, compromised because he was daydreaming about his girlfriend. That's season 1, episode-level stupidity. And then there's the Doak situation, which starts in season 1 and doesn't fully resolve until season 2. Sergeant James Dokes is the one person at Miami Metro who consistently suspects that something is off about Dexter. From the very beginning, Dokes calls Dexter fake and a creep motherfucker. He watches him, he follows him. He's openly hostile to Dexter in a way that nobody else at the department is, because Dokes actually has functioning instincts about people. And what does Dexter do about this? Does he keep his head down? Does he go out of his way to seem normal and boring around the one person who's suspicious of him? No, he's snarky. He's antagonistic. He pokes at Dokes. He has this internal monologue where he admits that Dokes is the only one who gets the creeps from me. And then he just keeps behaving in the exact same way that gives Dokes the creeps. There's actually a flashback in season 7 that reveals the exact moment when Dokes first became suspicious of Dexter. Early in their working relationship, Dexter quoted a line from a journal kept by a suspect named Walter Monroe. It was something along the lines of, "Never jump the fence if you're not willing to face what's on the other side." Dokes recognized the quote because he'd seen it in the evidence file. He knew that only someone who had read that journal or someone very close to the case would know that line. And Dexter had been warned by Masuka not to talk to Dokes at the time, which he chose to ignore. One careless quote. One ignored warning. That's all it took. From that moment on, Dokes made it his life's mission to figure out what Dexter was hiding. The guy who's supposed to be a genius at blending in outed himself to the one competent detective in the building because he couldn't resist quoting a murderer's diary to the wrong person. I should also mention that season 1 gives us a really interesting glimpse into Harry Morgan's own mistakes, because the pattern of bad decisions in this franchise doesn't start with Dexter, it starts with Harry. When Dexter was a child, Harry discovered that his adopted son had violent impulses. He found dead animals, he found the graves, he saw the signs. And instead of getting Dexter professional psychiatric help, instead of consulting child psychologists or exploring treatment options, Harry decided to train Dexter to channel his impulses into a system for killing bad people. Think about that for a second. A police officer, a man who swore an oath to uphold the law, decided that the best solution for a child's emerging violent tendencies was to teach him to be a better killer. The Code of Harry isn't a treatment plan. It's an operating manual for a serial killer. It teaches Dexter how to select victims, how to confirm their guilt, how to prepare a kill room, how to dispose of bodies, and how to avoid detection. Harry essentially created an assassin and convinced himself that it was therapy. The show presents this as a pragmatic decision by a loving father who was out of options. And on one level, it is. Harry genuinely cared about Dexter. He wanted to protect him from the prison system, from himself, from a world that wouldn't understand him. But the practical result of Harry's decision is that Dexter grew up with the skills and the moral framework to kill dozens of people while believing he was doing the right thing. Every bad decision Dexter makes as an adult has its roots in the training Harry gave him as a child. And Harry knew it was wrong. That's the most tragic part. In Season 2, it's revealed through a conversation between Dexter and Captain Matthews that Harry's death wasn't from heart disease. It was suicide. Harry overdosed on his heart medication. He killed himself because he saw what Dexter had become, because he walked in on Dexter proudly dismembering a man and realized that the code hadn't civilized his son's impulses. It had perfected them. Harry created a monster, realized what he'd done, and couldn't live with it. Dexter doesn't learn about this until late in Season 2, and it shakes him. The discovery that Harry, his hero, his moral compass, his guiding light, chose death over watching Dexter continue is one of the most devastating revelations in the series. It should be a turning point. It should make Dexter question everything, and for a few episodes, it does. But then the crisis passes, the Bay Harbor butcher case gets pinned on Dokes, and Dexter goes back to business as usual. This is the fundamental problem with Dexter's character. He experiences moments of genuine self-awareness, moments where he sees himself clearly and then he lets them pass. The insight never sticks, the lesson never takes. He knows that Harry killed himself because of what he became, and his response is to keep being what Harry couldn't face. Now, I want to pause here for a second because I think it's worth pointing out something about how the show works. Dexter survives Season 1 not because he's brilliant, not because his planning is flawless, but because the people around him are either not paying attention or actively being misled. Laguerta is chasing the wrong suspect in the ice truck killer case. Deborah is too personally involved to see what's right in front of her. And Dokes, the one person who has the right instincts, is considered abrasive and difficult by his colleagues, so his concerns get brushed aside. This is going to be a pattern we see over and over throughout the series. Dexter's longest-running skill isn't evading detection. It's being lucky enough to exist in an environment where the people around him don't look too closely, don't follow up on their suspicions, or straight up die before they can act on what they've figured out. But we'll get into that more as we go, because Season 2 is where things really start to spiral. All those bodies Dexter dumped in the same spot in the ocean, they've been found. The Bay Harbor butcher investigation has begun. And the killer they're looking for is sitting in a lab about 30 feet from the task force whiteboard, eating donuts and analyzing blood spatter like nothing's wrong. Season 2 is honestly the season where you'd expect the show to end. Not because the writing is bad, it's actually quite good, but because the premise of the entire season is that Dexter's secret dumping ground has been discovered, and the FBI has sent one of their best agents, Frank Lundy, to lead the investigation. The task force is set up inside Miami Metro Homicide, the same building where Dexter works, every day at the desk right next to the people actively looking for him. And Dexter's initial response to all of this isn't to stop killing or to lay low or to get out of town for a while. He keeps going. He's like a guy who sees a road closed sign and just drives around it. The Bay Harbor butcher investigation is the biggest case in Miami. The FBI is camped out in his workplace, and Dexter is still out there wrapping people in plastic and taking his boat out to sea. He does at least switch to a different disposal method for a bit, but the audacity of continuing to kill while the heat is directly on him is staggering. There's actually a great detail in early Season 2 that shows just how close Dexter comes to getting caught before the investigation even ramps up. When the FBI technicians set up inside Miami Metro, they take over parts of the lab, including areas near Dexter's workspace. They're reviewing forensic databases, examining files, and cross-referencing evidence. Dexter is sitting 10 feet away pretending to work, while federal agents analyze evidence from his own murders. At one point, he overhears them discussing the butcher's victim profile and realizes they're describing people he killed. He's literally listening to his own criminal profile being constructed in real time. Any normal person would be having a panic attack. Dexter makes a mental note and goes to get more donuts. There's also the matter of how Dexter discovers he's under suspicion. Throughout Season 2, he notices that he's being followed, cars tailing him, FBI agents in unmarked vehicles. He realizes that Lundy has placed him under surveillance. And his immediate concern isn't his own safety, but the fact that he can't get to the Everglades to dispose of Santos Jimenez's body because the FBI is watching his every move. He's literally trying to figure out a window in the surveillance schedule where he can sneak away and deal with a corpse. The priorities of this man. And when the FBI eventually calls him in for questioning about the bloodslide, Dexter walks into the room expecting to be arrested. He's prepared. He's resigned. He thinks it's over. And then Lundy and Captain Matthews tell him that the slides were found in Dokes' car, and they want Dexter's help building the case against Dokes. The look on Dexter's face is this incredible mixture of disbelief and relief. He went in thinking he was going to prison and walked out being asked to help frame the one person who actually had him figured out. From that moment, Dexter leans into the Dokes framing. He tells the FBI that he always sensed something off about Dokes, which is technically true, just in the opposite direction from what they think. He provides forensic analysis that supports the theory that Dokes was the butcher. He's essentially testifying against an innocent man, or at least a man who is innocent of these particular crimes, while the actual killer stands right next to the investigators and nods along. The brass of it is almost admirable in its shamelessness. Almost. Now, Season 2 also introduces us to one of Dexter's worst decisions in the entire series, and that's getting involved with Lila West. Lila is Dexter's sponsor from Narcotics Anonymous, which he's attending as a cover story to explain his behavioral issues to Rita. From the moment Lila shows up, she is visibly, obviously, unmistakably unstable. She's manipulative. She's obsessive. She's an arsonist, which is not even subtext. She literally sets her own loft on fire. Multiple characters throughout the season warn Dexter about her. Rita breaks up with Dexter because of her. Angel Batista gets sucked into her orbit and nearly gets burned. Everyone who comes within 10 feet of Lila can see that she is trouble. And Dexter not only gets involved with her, he gives her access to his life. She knows where he lives. She knows his routines. She has been inside his apartment. And critically, he leaves his GPS navigation device where she can get to it. This is where it gets genuinely catastrophic. Earlier in Season 2, Dokes had finally caught Dexter red-handed. He followed Dexter, found him with body parts, and confronted him. But Dexter managed to overpower Dokes and imprisoned him in a cabin, deep in the Florida Everglades. The plan, and I use that word loosely, was to keep Dokes locked in a cage while Dexter figured out what to do with him. Not a great plan, more of a holding pattern, really. A stalling tactic from a man who supposedly thinks 3 steps ahead. So Lila, jealous and unstable, steals Dexter's GPS device. She checks the history. She sees that Dexter has been making regular trips to a specific location in the Everglades, and she drives out there. She finds the cabin. She finds Dokes locked in a cage. Dokes tells her straight up that Dexter is the Bay Harbor butcher. And Lila's response is not to call the police, not to run, not to do anything a rational person would do. She sympathizes with Dexter for having to carry such a heavy secret. And then she turns on a gas stove, opens the valve on a propane tank, and walks out. The cabin explodes. Dokes dies. Now, from Dexter's perspective, this is miraculous. His biggest problem just got solved by someone else entirely. But let's be very clear about what happened here. Dexter left a GPS device accessible to a person he knew was obsessive, unstable, and had a history of fire-related destruction. That GPS had his route to the secret cabin where he was illegally imprisoning a police sergeant. Lila found the cabin, blew it up, and killed the one person who could definitively prove Dexter was the butcher. None of this was Dexter's plan. He didn't orchestrate it. He didn't even know it was happening until after the fact. And then it gets even more convenient. When the authorities investigate the cabin wreckage, they find Dokes' body along with the dismembered remains of Jose Garza, one of Dexter's victims. Deputy Director Adams takes one look at the evidence and declares that Dokes was the Bay Harbor butcher. Lundy doesn't fully agree, but he's overruled. Case closed. But here's the detail that really makes this entire season a story about luck rather than skill. Remember those blood slides? Dexter kept them in his apartment. But before the cabin exploded, Dokes had stolen the blood slide box from Dexter's apartment, planning to take them to Haiti for analysis. Dokes flew out of the country with the slides in his possession, and they were found in the trunk of his car at the airport. So when the FBI searched for evidence linking Dokes to the murders, there it was, the butcher's trophy collection in the trunk of the suspect's car. If Dokes hadn't stolen those slides at that exact moment in time, they would have been in Dexter's apartment when the investigation was at its peak. FBI technicians were literally in Dexter's lab going through his files. If they had found a box of blood slides hidden in his air conditioning unit, the show would have been over in season 2. Dexter survived that season entirely by accident. Lila's arson solved the Dokes problem. Dokes' own theft of the slides provided the framing evidence. The FBI's eagerness to close the case did the rest. The supposed genius serial killer was saved by a concatenation of coincidences that he had absolutely no control over and no way to predict. I also want to talk about one more thing from season 2 that really demonstrates how Dexter's judgment breaks down when emotions get involved. There's a subplot where Dexter discovers that his biological father, Joe Driscoll, has died and left him a house. Inside the house, Dexter finds evidence that connects to his past and to the murder of his biological mother, Laura Moser. This leads him to Santos Jimenez, the drug dealer who killed Laura in a shipping container when Dexter was 3 years old. Dexter tracks Jimenez down and kills him. That part is consistent with the code. But here's the stupid part. Dexter kills Jimenez in the Everglades at the same cabin where he later imprisons Dokes, and he doesn't dispose of the body quickly enough. He gets distracted by Rita, by Lila, by the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, and Jimenez's remains are still at the cabin when things start going sideways. It's yet another example of Dexter's pattern of sloppy timing when his personal life is pulling at his attention. And speaking of Lila, after the Dokes situation resolves, Dexter realizes that Lila is a loose end. She knows too much. She blew up the cabin. She's erratic and dangerous. So Dexter tracks her down and kills her. Which, fine, that's Dexter being Dexter. But the fact that he got involved with her in the first place, that he let an obviously dangerous person get close enough to access his GPS, his apartment, his routines, is a mistake that could have ended everything, not just his secret life, but the lives of everyone around him. Season 2 should have been the end of Dexter Morgan. By every reasonable measure, he should have been caught. The evidence was piling up. The FBI was on site. The one detective who had him figured out was closing in. And Dexter's escape came down to an arsonist ex-girlfriend, a stolen blood slide box, and a bureaucracy that wanted to wrap up the case more than it wanted to find the truth. I always think about what Frank Lundy would say if he knew the full picture. Lundy was sharp, he was careful. He pushed back on the idea that Dokes was the butcher, but he was overruled by people who cared more about closing the file than following the evidence. In later seasons, there's an online article quoted in the show that says, according to FBI Special Agent Frank Lundy, it's almost certain that the butcher is still at work. Lundy knew. He just couldn't prove it because the evidence that would have proven it was in the trunk of a dead man's car, put there by the actual killer's own carelessness. If you thought that near-death experience would make Dexter more careful, that he'd learn from the closest call of his life and start tightening his operation, well, I've got bad news. Season 3 introduces a new kind of mistake for Dexter, one that doesn't involve sloppy evidence or careless disposal, but something arguably worse. He makes a friend. His name is Miguel Prado, and he's an assistant district attorney in Miami, played by Jimmy Smits. Miguel is charismatic, powerful, politically connected, and deeply frustrated by the criminals who keep slipping through the legal system. He and Dexter bond over their shared contempt for people who get away with terrible things. The way it starts is actually through an accident. Dexter is hunting a drug dealer named Freebo in the Season 3 premiere. When he arrives at Freebo's hideout, he encounters Miguel's brother, Oscar Prado, who is there for his own reasons. There's a struggle, and Dexter ends up killing Oscar in what amounts to self-defense. This isn't a planned kill, it's messy, chaotic, and it leaves Dexter with a dead ADA's brother on his hands and no good way to explain it. Miguel, grieving his brother's death, crosses paths with Dexter. They develop a friendship, and over the course of the season, Dexter begins to trust Miguel with pieces of the truth. Not all of it, not at first, but enough. He lets Miguel into his world. He teaches him, he shares the philosophy behind the code. And Miguel, who has been living with his own rage and frustration for years, latches onto it like a lifeline. This is the first time Dexter has ever had something like a peer, not a romantic partner, not a family member, but an equal. Someone who understands the appeal of taking justice into your own hands. And Dexter is genuinely moved by the connection. He calls Miguel a friend, he means it. But here's the problem. Miguel doesn't have the code, he doesn't have the discipline, he doesn't have Harry's rules. What he has is power, connections, and a newly awakened appetite for violence. And it doesn't take long before Miguel starts going off script. He kills Ellen Wolf, a defense attorney who had been a professional thorn in his side. She wasn't a murderer, she wasn't someone who fit the code. She was just inconvenient. And Miguel killed her because he wanted to. Dexter realizes he's created a monster, or rather he's enabled one. He shared his most dangerous secret with a man he didn't truly understand. And now that man is using the knowledge to justify murders that have nothing to do with justice. The rest of Season 3 is Dexter trying to contain the damage and eventually having to kill Miguel himself. The Miguel Prado arc establishes what becomes one of Dexter's most destructive recurring patterns. He keeps letting people into his secret life, and every single time it goes badly. He does it with Lila in Season 2, with Miguel in Season 3, with Lumen in Season 5, with Hannah in Season 7, and with Vogel in Season 8. Each time, Dexter convinces himself that this person is different, that they can handle the truth, that sharing his burden will make him less alone. And each time, the relationship spirals into disaster. There's also a subplot in Season 3 involving Dexter's engagement and marriage to Rita. He proposes, they plan a wedding, and through it all, Dexter is dealing with the Miguel situation, stalking targets, and maintaining his double life. The wedding itself is a beautiful scene, and for a moment it feels like Dexter might actually pull it off. He might actually get the normal life he keeps chasing. But on the night before his wedding, after being fitted for a replacement suit because his original one was ruined, Dexter is walking down the street and a man named George King, the Skinner, who has been the season's secondary villain, attacks him. King has been hunting Dexter for killing Freebo, and the confrontation ends with Dexter fighting for his life on the eve of his marriage. He barely survives. Rita never knows how close she came to being a widow before the ceremony even happened. Season 3 isn't considered one of the strongest seasons by fans, but it introduces a crucial piece of the puzzle. It shows us that Dexter's worst enemy isn't a serial killer or a detective or the FBI. It's his own need for connection. His desire to not be alone is the single most dangerous thing about him, more dangerous than his dark passenger, more dangerous than his compulsion to kill. Because every time he lets someone in, the fallout is catastrophic. And that brings us to what many fans consider the best season of the show. Season 4, the Trinity Killer season. If Season 2 is the story of Dexter being lucky, and Season 3 is the story of Dexter making a dangerous friend, Season 4 is the story of Dexter's luck running out in the most devastating way possible. Season 4 introduces Arthur Mitchell, played by John Lithgow, a family man who also happens to be one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. Arthur has been killing for over 30 years, following a ritual pattern that earned him the name Trinity because his cycle involves 3 specific types of murder. A young woman bled to death in a bathtub, a middle-aged mother forced to jump from a building, and a man beaten to death. Later in the season, they discover there's actually a 4th murder in the cycle involving a young boy who is abducted and held in a bunker, which means the nickname doesn't quite fit. But by the time the police figure that out, Trinity has been known by that name for too long to change it. John Lithgow's performance as Arthur Mitchell is, by the way, widely considered one of the greatest villain performances in television history. He won an Emmy for the role, and deservedly so. There's a scene where Arthur is at a DNA checkpoint that the police have set up to catch him, and instead of panicking, he calmly turns his car around and drives away, suggesting to Dexter that they take the scenic route. He laughs while doing it. The man has been killing for 30 years because he's genuinely calm under pressure, genuinely disciplined, genuinely intelligent in ways that Dexter only thinks he is. Arthur Mitchell is everything Dexter wishes he was, but isn't. There's another incredible detail from the season that I think deserves mention. Arthur keeps his sister's ashes in a small glass vial. He carries them everywhere. At one of the Four Walls charity builds, he spreads the last of these ashes before attempting to jump off the roof. The ashes represent his original trauma, the death of his sister, which triggered his entire kill cycle. Arthur has been reenacting variations of 3 family deaths for 30 years, and nobody around him knew. His wife didn't know, his children didn't know, his neighbors, his church group, his charity colleagues, none of them had any idea. That's what genuine concealment looks like. And it stands in stark contrast to Dexter, who can barely keep a secret from his nanny's boyfriend. Which makes it all the more baffling that Dexter chooses to study Arthur instead of killing him. What matters for our purposes is what Dexter decides to do when he discovers that Trinity isn't just a serial killer, but also a functioning family man with a wife, a son named Jonah, and a daughter named Rebecca. Arthur coaches Little League. He runs a charity called 4 Walls, 1 Heart that builds houses. He goes to church. From the outside, he looks like the ideal suburban dad. And Dexter becomes obsessed, not with killing Trinity, which is what the code would dictate. He becomes obsessed with understanding how Trinity has managed to maintain a family life alongside decades of murder. Because Dexter, who is now married to Rita and has a baby named Harrison, plus 2 stepchildren, is struggling with the exact same thing. He wants to know Trinity's secret. How do you balance the darkness and the domesticity? How do you be a good father and a serial killer at the same time? So instead of killing Arthur Mitchell the first chance he gets, Dexter introduces himself to the Mitchell family using the fake name Kyle Butler. He goes to their house. He shakes Arthur's hand. He sits on their patio and drinks lemonade with Arthur's wife, Sally. He bonds with Jonah, Arthur's teenage son, who confides in Kyle about his father's abuse. He even gets invited to Thanksgiving dinner at the Mitchell house. Dexter Morgan, a serial killer, voluntarily embeds himself in the domestic life of another serial killer under a fake name, while both of them are actively being investigated by the police department where Dexter works. The Thanksgiving dinner scene deserves special attention because it's one of the most tense and brilliantly acted scenes in the entire series, but it's also a masterclass in terrible judgment. Dexter sits at Arthur Mitchell's dinner table, carving turkey, making small talk with the family, while knowing that the man at the head of the table has murdered hundreds of people. Arthur, meanwhile, is being his usual terrifying self, swinging between folksy charm and barely concealed menace. He's controlling, cruel to his children, and radiating danger, and Dexter is sitting right there with a wine glass in his hand, pretending everything is normal. There's a particularly uncomfortable moment during the meal when the family dynamics crack open. Arthur forces his son to break a baseball trophy. He humiliates his wife. His daughter sits in terrified silence. And Dexter, observing all of this, takes mental notes like he's at a particularly disturbing self-help seminar. He's there to learn from Trinity, remember. He wants to understand how this man balances murder and domesticity. And what he's witnessing is that the balance is built on terror. Arthur's family doesn't stay together because he's good at compartmentalizing. They stay because they're afraid of him. This should have been the moment Dexter realized that what he was doing was insane. He's sitting at dinner with a mass murderer, pretending to be someone he's not, while his own wife and children are at home waiting for him. He told Rita he had to work overtime. He's juggling plates, literally and figuratively, in the most dangerous situation possible. And the reason he's there, the reason he keeps going back to the Mitchell house, isn't strategic, it's emotional. He wants what he thinks Arthur has. A functioning family that somehow coexists with a secret, dark life. He's so desperate for the validation that this is possible that he ignores every red flag, every warning, every instinct telling him to just kill Trinity and go home to his kids. I want to really sit with how profoundly stupid this is. Arthur Mitchell has murdered hundreds of people over the course of 30 years. He's calculating, violent, and utterly without remorse. Dexter knows all of this. He's seen the crime scene photos. He's studied the pattern. And his plan is to befriend this man and learn from him like Arthur is some kind of dangerous life coach. Every single interaction between Dexter and the Mitchell family is a ticking time bomb. Every visit to their house is an opportunity for Arthur to figure out who Kyle really is. Every friendly conversation is a thread that, if pulled, would unravel Dexter's entire life. And Dexter does all of this voluntarily, not because the code requires it, not because there's no other option, but because he's curious. And then Dexter makes it worse. There's a scene where Arthur, who's involved with a charity called 4 Walls, 1 Heart, that builds houses for people in need, is at one of the build sites. He climbs up onto the roof, spreads his arms, and tries to throw himself off. He's attempting suicide, and Dexter, who is there observing him, instinctively runs forward and grabs Arthur's arm, preventing him from falling. Dexter saves the life of the serial killer he was planning to kill. Other builders rush over and pull Arthur to safety. Suddenly, everyone is shaking Dexter's hand, calling him a hero. His anonymity, the one thing keeping him safe, is completely destroyed. Arthur Mitchell looks at Dexter and says, "I thought God sent you so that I could save you, but God had another plan. He sent you to save me." The irony is absolutely brutal. Now, in Dexter's defense, this is a complicated moral moment. Letting Arthur die by suicide means Arthur doesn't face justice for his crimes. It also means Dexter doesn't get to carry out his ritual, which, while dark, is part of how Dexter processes his compulsion. But the practical reality is that Dexter saved a mass murderer's life in front of witnesses, cementing his presence in Arthur's world and making it exponentially harder to kill him cleanly later. The consequences escalate from there. While Dexter's juggling his surveillance of Arthur with his actual job, his marriage, and his responsibilities as a father, Arthur's secret daughter, Christine Hill, shoots Deborah and Frank Lundy in a parking lot. Lundy dies, Deborah survives but is seriously wounded. Christine did this to protect her father's identity because Lundy was getting too close to identifying Trinity. When Christine's connection to Arthur starts to come out, things move fast. Christine calls Arthur desperate and scared. Arthur tells her he's sorry she was ever born and hangs up on her. She later kills herself in front of Deborah. And here's where Dexter makes another critical error. After Christine's death, Dexter goes to the police station to be with Deborah. He's being a good brother, but Arthur, who has been trying to figure out who Kyle Butler really is, follows Dexter to the station. Arthur walks into Miami Metro Homicide. He asks the desk officer if a Kyle Butler works there. The officer says no. Arthur steals a visitor's pass from an old woman's purse and strolls through security. He wanders through the department. He looks at the Trinity investigation whiteboard and sees that the police are focused on a different suspect, Stan Beaudry, which amuses him. And then he spots it, a photo on a trophy case of Dexter with his bowling team, labeled Miami Metro Homicide Bowling Team. A bowling team photo on display in a public area of the police station. That's how the Trinity killer figures out that his new friend Kyle Butler is actually Dexter Morgan, forensic analyst for the very department investigating him. Arthur walks up to Dexter and says, "Hello, Dexter Morgan." The look on Dexter's face in that moment is pure horror, and it should be. Every bad decision he made in season 4 has just collapsed into one sentence. The fake name, the house visits, the Thanksgiving dinner, saving Arthur's life on the roof, All of it was built into this moment where a man who has killed for 30 years now knows exactly who Dexter is and where he works. Arthur tells Dexter to disappear from his life and his family will be safe. As he's walking away, he adds, "If I were you, I'd give up vigilantism. You're not very good at it." And honestly, hard to argue with that assessment. What follows is one of the most intense stretches in the entire series. Dexter chases Arthur out of the station but gets stopped by Quinn, who needs him to sign off on a blood spatter report. By the time Dexter gets to the parking lot, Arthur's van is pulling away. Dexter drives like a maniac through Miami traffic, weaving between cars with one hand on the wheel while Rita calls to discuss honeymoon plans. He clips another car's mirror and keeps going. Meanwhile, there are only 2 Kyle Butlers in the Miami phone book. Arthur looks them up. He shows up at one Kyle Butler's apartment, injects him with a sedative, and waits inside. Dexter realizes what's happening and lays a trap at the apartment. But Arthur spots Christmas card photos by the door, showing a man who looks nothing like Dexter, and he leaves. An innocent man named Kyle Butler gets murdered by Arthur during this search, which is more blood on Dexter's hands, the collateral damage of using a fake identity and then losing control of the situation. Dexter eventually catches Arthur. He finally does what he should have done months earlier and puts him on a table. He kills him. It's over, except it's not. Because Arthur had one final move. Dexter comes home from the kill feeling something close to relief for the first time in months. He walks through the front door. The house is quiet. He calls out for Rita. No answer. He walks upstairs. Nothing. Then he goes into the bathroom. Rita is in the bathtub, dead. Arthur Mitchell had come to Dexter's house before Dexter caught him and killed Rita in the exact same way he killed the first victim in his cycle, bled out in a bathtub. And sitting on the bathroom floor in a pool of his mother's blood is baby Harrison. This is the consequence of everything. The fake name, the Thanksgiving dinner, the saved suicide attempt, the bowling team photo, the delayed kill. Every decision Dexter made in season 4 was a domino, and they all fell on Rita. The season 4 finale, The Getaway, has a 9.8 out of 10 rating on IMDb. It's the highest rated episode of the entire series, and it's essentially a 2-hour demonstration of what happens when a man who thinks he can control everything discovers that he can't. I always come back to one simple fact about season 4. Dexter had multiple chances to kill Arthur Mitchell early in the season. The code was satisfied. Arthur was a confirmed killer with dozens of victims. There was nothing stopping Dexter from doing what he does best. Instead, he chose curiosity over caution, self-discovery over safety. And the result was that his wife was murdered and his infant son was orphaned in the most traumatic way imaginable. Harrison sitting in that blood on the bathroom floor mirrors Dexter's own origin story, the shipping container where 3-year-old Dexter sat in his mother's blood for 2 days before Harry Morgan found him. The cycle of violence and trauma repeating itself because Dexter couldn't just follow his own rules. After Rita's death, something breaks inside Dexter, and when broken people make decisions, those decisions tend to be even worse than the ones that broke them in the first place. Which is exactly what happens in the season 5 premiere when Dexter does something that might be the single most reckless thing he's ever done. And he does it in a gas station bathroom. After Rita's funeral, which Dexter almost doesn't attend because he's out on his boat contemplating disappearing forever, he goes through a full emotional collapse. He burns his kill tools and his blood slide box in a storage unit. He's planning to leave Miami, leave Harrison, leave everything behind. He stops at a dockside fueling station to buy gas and encounters a man inside the store who's being loud and aggressive, demanding the bathroom key from the shop owner. Dexter stares at the man. The man notices, takes offense, and calls Dexter a slur. And Dexter, who is in the worst emotional state of his entire life, follows this man into the public restroom of a gas station, picks up a grappling hook, and beats him to death. This wasn't planned, there was no plastic wrap, no preparation. No code of Harry. The victim, a man named Rankin, hadn't killed anyone. He was rude. That's it. He was rude to a guy who was having a really bad week, and Dexter caved his skull in with a boat hook in a public restroom where anyone could have walked in at any moment. The shop owner, another customer, someone needing the bathroom, any one of these people could have opened that door and found Dexter Morgan standing over a dead body with a weapon in his hand. No kill room, no plastic, no plan, just rage and a grappling hook in a room with no lock. Harry appears to Dexter in the bathroom mirror afterward and says it was the first human thing he's done since Rita's death, which I suppose is true in a twisted way. But from a practical standpoint, this should have been the end of Dexter's freedom. In any realistic version of events, this kills gets traced, the gas station has records, there might be cameras, and Dexter goes to prison. The show just moves past it. And honestly, this is one of those moments where even the most dedicated fans have to squint a little and go, wait, how did he get away with that? Before we move on from the Rita aftermath, there's one more piece of postseason 4 stupidity that deserves attention. And it's about what happens when Dexter finally does come back from the edge and cooperates with the FBI investigation into Rita's death. Dexter sits down for his FBI interview and almost immediately loses his temper. The agents are asking pointed questions, the kind of questions you'd expect them to ask the husband of a murder victim. Dexter bristles at the implication. They eventually tell him he has an ironclad alibi because he was at the raid on Arthur Mitchell's house during the time of Rita's murder. They just want to know why Mitchell targeted Rita specifically. Dexter's response is just, because he's a serial killer? Which, I mean, sure, but maybe don't be dismissive and confrontational during an FBI interview when you are in fact hiding a massive secret. The real problem, though, is the Kyle Butler situation. The FBI tells Maria Laguerta that the name Kyle Butler keeps coming up in the Mitchell investigation. This rings a bell for Laguerta because a man by that exact name was recently murdered in Miami, killed by Arthur Mitchell while he was searching for Dexter. The FBI plans to have a sketch artist sit down with the Mitchell family to create a composite of the Kyle Butler who had been visiting Arthur. Jonah Mitchell, Arthur's son, gives a description to the sketch artist. So does Arthur's wife and daughter. The sketches come out looking different from each other because memory is unreliable, but they all have enough of a resemblance to one person. Joey Quinn, who has been mildly suspicious of Dexter since Rita's death, pieces the sketches together and notices the similarity. He recognizes Dexter in the composite. Quinn is arguably the closest thing to Dokes that the later seasons produce. He sees something off about Dexter, he investigates. He hires a dirty ex-cop named Stan Liddy to surveil Dexter. But unlike Dokes, Quinn is compromised. He's sleeping with someone he shouldn't be. He has his own ethical issues, and he ultimately doesn't have the follow-through to take his suspicions to their logical conclusion. So the Kyle Butler thread just kind of fades. But it shouldn't have. Dexter used a common first name and surname as his alias, didn't change his appearance at all, hung out at the Mitchell house regularly, and then a man with that exact fake name got murdered. The only reason Dexter isn't sitting in an interrogation room for the rest of his life is that Quinn got sidetracked and Laguerta didn't push hard enough. Luck again. Now let's talk about Season 5, which has its own unique brand of terrible decision-making. Season 5 introduces Lumen Pierce, played by Julia Stiles. Lumen is a woman who was kidnapped, raped, and tortured by a group of men led by a motivational speaker and self-help guru named Jordan Chase. Dexter discovers Lumen inside a barrel while investigating a dead animal pickup worker named Boyd Fowler, who turns out to be one of Jordan Chase's accomplices. Dexter's decision here is to take Lumen under his wing. Not to call the police, not to report the kidnapping, not to let the system handle it. He takes a traumatized civilian, a person with zero training, zero understanding of forensic countermeasures, zero capacity for the kind of methodical violence Dexter practices, and he turns her into his killing partner. They spend the rest of the season hunting down Jordan Chase's group one by one, with Lumen present for the kills, helping set up, participating in the executions. This is insane. Lumen is an emotional wreck, and understandably so. She's acting out of trauma and vengeance, not out of any kind of calculated process. She has no idea how to cover her tracks. She doesn't understand evidence or forensics. And Dexter's bringing her along on his kills like she's an intern at a particularly grim consulting firm. The season climax involves Dexter and Lumen going after Jordan Chase at an old summer camp. Dexter drives there in a hurry. His car flips over when it hits the arm of a backhoe, and he crawls out of the wreck only to find Jordan Chase standing over him. Chase takes Dexter's knife roll, ties him up, and drags him into a building where Lumen is hanging from a rafter. If Lumen hadn't managed to get free at the critical moment, both of them would have died. The great forensic genius was captured because he crashed his car on the way to the kill. And then there's Stan Liddy, the dirty cop Quinn hired to tail Dexter. Liddy sets up surveillance cameras and catches footage of Dexter and Lumen. The footage isn't entirely clear, but it's damning enough. Liddy confronts Dexter in his surveillance van with a knife, and Dexter kills him in self-defense. Here's the thing about the Liddy situation. Liddy is killed inside a van, a surveillance van filled with equipment that has Quinn's name on the requisition forms. There's blood from the struggle. Quinn's fingerprints are on everything, and the blood gets on Quinn's shoe when he visits the crime scene later. This should be a career-ending, prison sentence-creating situation for both Quinn and Dexter. But what happens? Dexter processes the Liddy crime scene himself. He's assigned to analyze the evidence from a murder that he committed, and he quietly makes sure the evidence doesn't point anywhere useful, including cleaning the blood off Quinn's shoe. A forensic analyst processing his own crime scene, handling evidence from his own murder, making it all go away. It's brazen beyond belief, and it works because nobody in the department even considers the possibility that their mild-mannered blood guy might be involved. The pattern holds. Dexter isn't smart. He's just surrounded by people who don't look too hard. I want to take a minute here to talk about Quinn a bit more, because his arc in Season 5 is one of those things that really highlights how Dexter gets away with everything. Joey Quinn is, for all his flaws, not a bad detective. He's crooked in some ways, sure, he takes shortcuts, he has ethical blind spots, but his instincts about Dexter are correct. After Rita's death, Quinn starts looking at Dexter more closely. He notices things that other people miss. He sees the Kyle Butler sketch and recognizes the resemblance to Dexter. He hires Liddy to run surveillance. And what happens? Liddy ends up dead. The surveillance evidence is inconclusive. Quinn becomes a suspect in Liddy's murder because his name is on the equipment requisition forms. And Dexter, the actual murderer, is the one who processes the crime scene and quietly clears Quinn's shoe of blood evidence. So Quinn's own investigation leads to his near arrest, and the man he was investigating is the one who saves him. After that, Quinn basically gives up on the Dexter angle entirely. His suspicions, which were completely founded, get neutralized not by clever planning on Dexter's part, but by the absurd irony of the situation. This is what I mean when I say Dexter gets bailed out by circumstance rather than cunning. Quinn was right. Liddy was right. The evidence was there. And Dexter survived not because he outsmarted them, but because the murder of Liddy created a situation where everyone was too busy protecting themselves to keep pulling the thread. Season 5 also gives us the Barrel Girls case, which ties into Dexter's partnership with Lumen. The case involves a group of men led by motivational speaker Jordan Chase, who kidnapped, raped, and tortured multiple women. Dexter and Lumen systematically hunt them down. And throughout this process, Dexter is teaching Lumen how to prepare kill rooms, how to use plastic sheeting, how to handle a knife. He's training a civilian in the art of serial murder. I've always thought this was one of the weirdest moral choices the show makes. With previous kills, Dexter at least had the justification of the code and decades of practice. With Lumen, he's creating a brand new accomplice, someone who has never killed before. someone who is acting entirely out of trauma and putting her in situations where a single mistake could get them both caught or killed. She's not built for this. She's a victim trying to reclaim agency, and Dexter is using her pain to feed his own need for a partner in his dark work. The thing that saves them in the end is, once again, luck. Deborah finds the kill site, sees two silhouettes through a plastic curtain, and lets them go because she believes they're some kind of vigilante couple. She doesn't recognize Dexter, she doesn't pull back the curtain, she makes a moral choice based on incomplete information. And that choice is the only thing standing between Dexter and a prison cell. After Lumen leaves, something important shifts in Dexter. He's more isolated than ever. The brief connection he had with someone who understood his darkness is gone. Rita is dead, Deborah is processing her own trauma, and Dexter is left alone with his compulsions, his trophies, and an increasingly fragile cover story. Season 5 also has Dexter almost getting killed in a truly embarrassing way. He's investigating a man named Boyd Fowler, the dead animal removal worker who was part of Jordan Chase's group. Dexter breaks into Boyd's house to search for evidence, but Boyd comes home unexpectedly. There's a confrontation, and Dexter barely manages to subdue him with a tranquilizer. If Boyd had been slightly faster, slightly more alert, Dexter would have been caught red-handed in a suspect's home with no plausible explanation for being there. These kinds of close calls happen throughout the series, and they almost always stem from the same problem. Dexter is impatient, he takes shortcuts, he goes in before the situation is fully secure because the compulsion is stronger than his caution. It's also worth mentioning that somewhere around season 5, the show starts to subtly shift the way it presents Dexter's intelligence. In the early seasons, he's genuinely impressive. His crime scene analysis is sharp. His planning is thorough. His internal monologue reveals a mind that's always 3 steps ahead. But as the show goes on, the gap between what Dexter thinks he is and what he actually is starts to widen. He still narrates like a genius. He still carries himself with confidence. But the evidence tells a different story. The dropped slides, the forgotten trophies, the impulsive kills, the increasingly sloppy cover-ups. Season 5. Dexter is not Season 1 Dexter, and the decline is as much about character as it is about writing. Which brings us to Season 6, and honestly, this is where Dexter's sloppiness reaches a new peak. Season 6 centers around the Doomsday Killer, Travis Marshall, a religious fanatic who believes he's carrying out apocalyptic murders guided by his mentor, Professor James Geller. The big twist, which a lot of the audience figured out long before the show revealed it, is that Geller has been dead the whole time and Travis has been acting alone, hallucinating his mentor much like Dexter hallucinates Harry. I'm not going to spend too much time on the Doomsday Killer plot itself because, honestly, it's widely considered one of the weakest villain arcs in the series. But there are a few things worth mentioning before we get to the finale. First, there's the Brother Sam subplot. Brother Sam is a reformed gangster turned preacher who runs an auto body shop as a halfway house for ex-convicts. He's played by Mos Def, and he's one of the more interesting guest characters the show produced. Sam and Dexter develop an unlikely friendship. And Sam challenges Dexter to think about faith, redemption, and whether people can genuinely change. When Sam is shot by one of his own employees, Dexter kills the shooter, Nick, by drowning him in the ocean. It's an emotional kill, driven by grief over Sam's death rather than the code. Sam was a good person who tried to help Dexter see a better path, and Dexter's response to his death is more killing. The cycle continues. Second, there's the Nebraska episode, which is genuinely one of the strangest hours in the entire series. Dexter learns that the Trinity Killer's son, Jonah Mitchell, may have taken up his father's killing pattern. He drives from Florida to Nebraska to confront Jonah. Along the way, he's accompanied by a hallucination of his dead brother Brian Moser, the ice truck killer, who encourages Dexter to cut loose and kill without the code. Dexter ends up killing a man in Nebraska, a gas station incident that's eerily similar to the Rankin bathroom kill from Season 5 in terms of its impulsivity. When Dexter finds Jonah, the truth turns out to be more complicated than he expected. Trinity's daughter Rebecca killed herself in a bathtub, and Jonah beat his mother Sally to death in retaliation for years of abuse. Dexter decides not to kill Jonah, which is a rare moment of mercy. But the whole Nebraska trip was a massive waste of time and risk. He drove across the country, committed a murder in another state, and accomplished nothing that couldn't have been handled with a phone call. Third, and this is the one that really matters, there's the way Dexter handles the Travis Marshall kill and its aftermath. Throughout Season 6, Travis escalates his apocalyptic tableaus. He paints victims with symbols. He creates elaborate displays involving horses, locusts, and biblical imagery. He's dramatic and unstable, which makes him both dangerous and, frankly, a bit exhausting as a villain compared to the ice truck killer or Trinity. In the season finale, after Travis attempts to kill both Dexter and Harrison on a rooftop, Dexter manages to escape and tracks Travis to a church. What I want to focus on is not just the kill itself, which we've discussed, but the cover-up, because it's one of the messiest things Dexter has ever done. After Deborah walks in on the kill, Dexter has to improvise. He convinces Deborah that he snapped and killed Travis in a moment of rage. Deborah, against her better judgment, agrees to help cover it up. Here's their plan, if you can call it a plan. They burn down the church. Before doing so, Dexter rearranges the scene to make it look like Travis committed ritual suicide, stabbing himself with the sword. Deborah goes to a nearby gas station to get a can of fuel. They douse the church and light it up. When the fire department and police arrive, the scene is processed as a suicide. Masuka and the forensic team conclude that Travis killed himself because the world didn't end as he predicted. Detective Mike Anderson has some doubts. He notes that Travis's car wasn't found at the church and questions how a suicidal man got there, but he doesn't push it far enough before he gets killed in a separate incident early in Season 7. So the cover-up technically works, but it works in the most precarious duct tape and prayer way possible. Dexter had to convince his sister to commit arson at a crime scene. He had to rearrange a body while his sister watched. He had to remove evidence of his plastic wrap and kill setup while a fire raged around them. And then he had to walk back to work the next day and process the very crime scene he created. And through all of that, he still dropped the blood slide. He still left behind the one piece of evidence that would connect this kill to the Bay Harbor butcher. The man who was supposed to be the best forensic mind in the department couldn't do a clean cover-up of his own crime scene. What I want to focus on is the ending, because the Season 6 finale contains one of the most consequential moments of carelessness in the entire show. Dexter catches Travis Marshall. He subdues him, wraps him in plastic, and sets up a ritual kill inside a church. He's standing over Travis on the altar, knife raised, surrounded by his plastic sheeting and kill setup. And at that exact moment, Deborah walks in. She sees everything, her brother standing over a bound man about to plunge a knife into him. This is the moment fans had been waiting for since Season 1. Deborah discovers Dexter's secret, and it happens not because of clever detective work, not because Deborah pieced together the clues, but because Dexter set up a kill in a semi-public building and didn't bother to lock the door or check if anyone was coming. Dexter's explanation is almost laughably weak. He tells Deborah that he snapped because of the lingering trauma of Rita's death, and that he killed Travis in a moment of temporary insanity. Deborah doesn't fully believe this, but she helps him anyway. They burn down the church to destroy the evidence. They agree to say that Travis committed suicide. It's messy, it's desperate, and it only works because Deborah's loyalty to her brother overrides her loyalty to the law. But here's the truly damaging part. In the chaos of the church fire and the cover-up, Dexter drops a blood slide. The slide has Travis Marshall's blood on it. He doesn't notice. He gets home, checks his box, and only then realizes the slide is missing. He tells sleeping baby Harrison that everything will be okay, which is one of those lines that hits different when you know what's coming. LaGuerta finds the slide under a grate at the church crime scene. And because LaGuerta has always had a nagging suspicion about the Bay Harbor butcher case, because she never fully believed that Dokes was the killer, this single dropped blood slide is enough to reopen the investigation. It's the thread that, once pulled, unravels everything. LaGuerta starts looking at people who've gone missing since Dokes died. She starts comparing victim profiles. She starts building a case, one blood slide, dropped at a crime scene, because Dexter was in a rush and didn't double-check his pockets. There's also a smaller but equally telling moment in Season 6 where Dexter drops his entire blood slide box while putting away a new slide. All the slides scatter across the floor, and he has no idea which slide belongs to which victim anymore. His meticulously organized trophy collection, the physical record of his entire killing career, scrambled on the ground like a dropped deck of cards, and he basically just shrugs it off. For a character who is defined by precision and ritual, this is a spectacular failure. It's not dramatic or life-threatening in the moment, but it captures something essential about where Dexter is at this point in the series. He's getting sloppy, his attention is fractured. The careful, methodical killer from Season 1 is gone, replaced by a man who's trying to juggle too many lives and dropping things, literally and figuratively, left and right. Season 6 ends with Deborah knowing the truth, LaGuerta finding the blood slide, and the stage set for what should be the end game of the entire series. Everything is converging. And instead of being careful, Dexter walks into Season 7 with the same combination of arrogance and carelessness that has defined him from the very beginning. Season 7 opens with the immediate aftermath of Deborah's discovery. She's found the blood slides and the kill tools in Dexter's apartment, and she asks him point blank, "Are you a serial killer?" Dexter says yes. Deborah runs out of the apartment and vomits in the hallway. Dexter chases after her. She's crying, shaking, barely able to stand. She asks how long he's been doing this. He tells her since he was 20 and that Harry taught him a code. Deborah can't process the idea that their father knew. She goes back inside the apartment and punches Dexter in the face. And this is where I want to point out something about the apartment itself. Dexter kept his kill tools and his entire blood slide collection in his apartment. The same apartment where Jamie Batista, his nanny, had a key and came and went freely. The same apartment where Louis Green, Jamie's boyfriend, was using Dexter's personal computer without permission. The same apartment where Deborah dropped by regularly, where friends visited, where maintenance workers had access. The trophies and tools of a decades-long murder spree stored in a residential apartment with foot traffic. He didn't rent a storage unit. He didn't use a safe deposit box. He didn't bury them. He kept them in his living space, behind a removable air conditioning panel and in what appears to be an accessible area of the apartment for years. And the only reason nobody found them sooner is that nobody thought to look, which again speaks to the central pattern of this entire series. Dexter isn't caught because nobody suspects him, and nobody suspects him because they're not paying attention. The evidence has been sitting in plain sight the entire time. There's also the Louis Green situation, which is worth talking about because it shows how Dexter's carelessness creates problems even with people who aren't investigating him. Lewis is an intern at Miami Metro who develops an unhealthy obsession with Dexter. He uses Dexter's computer without permission, he hacks Dexter's credit cards, he sends him the ice-struck killer's prosthetic hand as some kind of deranged message. Lewis is annoying and weird, but he's not dangerous in the way that Dokes or LaGuerta are dangerous. He's just a loose thread that Dexter has to deal with because he wasn't careful about who had access to his personal space. Lewis eventually gets killed by Isaac Serco's people at Dexter's marina, and the whole Louis subplot kind of fizzles out without a satisfying resolution. But the fact that a random intern was able to get close enough to Dexter's personal life to cause problems speaks to a larger issue. Dexter isn't careful about boundaries. He lets people into his space, his digital life, his routines, without thinking about the risk. He's so focused on the big threats, the serial killers, the investigators, the FBI, that he misses the small ones. And sometimes the small ones are the ones that start the avalanche. Speaking of avalanches, let's talk about the Isaac Serco situation in Season 7, because it's another example of Dexter creating problems for himself through impulsive action. Isaac Serko is the head of the Koshka Brotherhood, a Ukrainian organized crime syndicate operating in Miami. When one of Isaac's men, Viktor Baskov, kills Miami Metro Detective Mike Anderson, Dexter tracks Viktor down and kills him. Not because Viktor fits the code exactly, but because Dexter is angry about Mike's death and sees an opportunity. The problem is that Viktor was Isaac's lover. When Isaac finds out Viktor is dead, he traces the trail back to Dexter's marina and eventually to Dexter himself. Now Dexter has the head of a Ukrainian mob coming after him with serious resources and serious motivation. Isaac breaks into Dexter's apartment and waits for him. He stalks Dexter through Miami. He tries to corner him at the Colombian bar. He's relentless. Dexter only survives because of quick thinking in the moment, calling his own house phone to lure Isaac out of the apartment, for example, and because the Koshka Brotherhood's internal politics eventually work in his favor. But the entire situation exists because Dexter killed Viktor impulsively, without fully considering who Viktor was connected to or what the consequences might be. The code says, confirm the target, research the target, understand the target. Dexter skipped all of those steps because he was angry, and he ended up with a mob boss hunting him through the streets of Miami. Season 7 also introduces Hannah McKay, and if you thought Dexter's judgment about women was bad before, just wait. Hannah McKay is a former accomplice of serial killer Wayne Randall. She helped Wayne kill multiple people across several states before they were caught. She served time, got out, and now runs a plant nursery in Miami. She's beautiful, charming, and she has a history of poisoning people who get in her way. Dexter's supposed to kill her. She fits the code. She's gotten away with murder, including potentially poisoning her own husband. Dexter collects DNA evidence, confirms her guilt, and has everything he needs. And then he doesn't kill her, because he's attracted to her. They have sex on his kill table, which is as metaphorically heavy-handed as it sounds. And just like that, Dexter is in a relationship with a woman who is, by his own assessment, a murderer. This is not a small thing. Dexter doesn't just date Hannah, he protects her. When Deborah starts building a case against Hannah, Dexter sabotages the evidence. When Hannah is arrested, Dexter tampers with the physical proof that could convict her. He is actively obstructing justice, undermining his own sister's police work to protect a woman he's been seeing for a few weeks. And then Hannah poisons Deborah. She drugs Dexter's sister while Deborah is driving, causing a car accident that could have killed her. Deborah ends up in the hospital, and Dexter's response is complicated. He's upset. He confronts Hannah. But he doesn't turn her in. He doesn't cut ties. His sister nearly died because of the woman he's sleeping with, and he still can't bring himself to end the relationship. I think this is the moment where even the most sympathetic viewer has to step back and ask, what is wrong with this man? Not in a clinical, he's a sociopath way, because the show has spent 7 seasons arguing that Dexter is capable of real emotion, but in a practical, common sense way. Your sister, the person you care about more than anyone else in the world, was almost killed by your girlfriend. And you still choose the girlfriend. That's not a strategic decision. That's not even an emotional decision. It's a catastrophically bad one by any standard. Meanwhile, LaGuerta's investigation is picking up steam. She's found the blood slide from the church. She's looking at people who've gone missing since Dokes died and who fit the Bay Harbor butcher victim profile. She shows Deborah a list and asks for help investigating. Deborah, trapped between her brother and her duty, agrees to help LaGuerta in order to steer the investigation away from Dexter. When Deborah asks Dexter how many people on LaGuerta's list he killed, his answer is casual. 3 of them are my victims. He says it like he's reviewing a grocery list. One of the 3, Philip Barnes, has a family still living in Miami. Dexter stalked Barnes at a wedding reception before killing him, which means he could appear in wedding photographs. And sure enough, when Deborah goes to interview Barnes' son, she finds a photo of Dexter standing in the background of the reception. She has to pocket it before Lagerta sees a photograph of Dexter at the scene where he stalked a murder victim, hanging on a wall in the victim's family home. If Lagerta had gotten to that interview first, if Deborah had been 5 minutes late, the whole thing unravels right there. Dexter's habit of not worrying about being seen in public, of trusting that his normal guy facade will protect him, almost cost him everything. Again. The season 7 finale brings all of these threads crashing together. LaGuerta has figured out that Dexter is the Bay Harbor butcher, or at least she's close enough to be dangerous. She gets warrants to track Dexter's and Deborah's phones. She knows something is going on. Dexter decides to kill LaGuerta to protect himself and Deborah. His plan is elaborate. He lures Hector Estrada, the drug dealer who killed Dexter's biological mother, to a shipping container. He kills Estrada. Then he sets it up so that when LaGuerta arrives, attracted by a phone call from Estrada, it will look like LaGuerta and Estrada shot each other. A mutual killing, case closed, but Deborah shows up. She finds Dexter standing over an unconscious LaGuerta with a needle in his hand. Deborah has a gun. LaGuerta wakes up and tells Deborah to shoot Dexter, calling her a good person. Dexter agrees that Deborah is a good person. He drops his knife. He tells her, "Do what you gotta do." Deborah shoots LaGuerta. This moment destroys Deborah. Not immediately, not cleanly, but thoroughly and completely. From this point forward, Deborah spirals into alcoholism, depression, and self-destruction. She turns to drinking. She crashes her car into a parking meter while drunk. She falls asleep in her car surrounded by open containers. She nearly kills herself and Dexter by intentionally driving their car into a lake. She tells Dexter she wishes he'd never been born. She quits the police force. She becomes a private investigator for a sleazy firm because she can't stand being around cops anymore. All of this, every single piece of Deborah's destruction, traces back to Dexter. His choices, his carelessness, his dropped blood slide, his refusal to stop killing, his insistence that he could have a normal life and a dark life at the same time. LaGuerta died because Dexter left evidence behind. Deborah lost her soul because Dexter couldn't clean up after himself. And if you think Season 7 is where things reach their lowest point, I regret to inform you that Season 8 exists. Season 8 is the final season of the original series, and it is widely, almost universally, considered the weakest. The Season 8 finale, Remember the Monsters, has between a 4.6 and a 4.9 rating on IMDb, depending on when you check, making it the lowest rated episode of the entire series. It routinely shows up on lists of the worst television finales in history, and the decisions Dexter makes in this season are a big part of why. The season introduces Dr. Evelyn Vogel, a neuropsychiatrist who, it turns out, helped Harry create the code. She's been aware of Dexter's true nature for decades. She shows up in Miami and essentially appoints herself Dexter's spiritual mother, asking him to help her deal with a serial killer called the brain surgeon who has been targeting her former patients. Dexter goes along with this. He helps Vogel identify suspects. He kills one of them, a man named Sussman, only to discover later that Sussman wasn't the brain surgeon at all. He killed the wrong person. The actual brain surgeon turns out to be Oliver Saxon, who is, in a twist that feels more tired than shocking, Vogel's own biological son. Saxon was institutionalized as a child after he killed his brother, and Vogel essentially abandoned him. Now he's back, angry and dangerous. Dexter warns Vogel not to try to rehabilitate Saxon on her own. She doesn't listen. Saxon shows up at her house. He calls Dexter on the phone, tells him to look through the window, and then slits Vogel's throat while Dexter watches helplessly from outside. Dexter's mistake with Vogel is trusting her at all. She manipulated Harry. She manipulated Dexter. She made catastrophically bad decisions about her own son. And Dexter, despite spending his entire life being suspicious of everyone around him, let this woman into his inner circle because she told him he was perfect. He wanted a mother figure so badly that he ignored every warning sign. And then there's the Argentina plan. Dexter's grand exit strategy for the series is to sell his boat, kill Saxon, and flee to Argentina with Hannah McKay and Harrison. Hannah, who is still a wanted fugitive, whose face has been plastered all over the news, who hasn't even changed her hair color. They're going to fly to South America with a toddler and start a new life, and apparently nobody will notice that the woman on America's Most Wanted just passed through customs. The show presents this as a real plan, a viable escape. Dexter discusses logistics. He sells his apartment. He tells Deborah he's leaving the country, and not a single character, including Dexter himself, seems to think there might be a flaw in the strategy of transporting a nationally wanted fugitive through an international airport. The pen kill in the holding cell is another masterpiece of absurdity. Saxon has been captured and is being held at Miami Metro. Dexter walks into the holding cell under the pretense of performing a GSR test, which is a gunshot residue test. He brings a kit, opens it up, and places a ballpoint pen on the table. Then he tells Saxon, essentially, that he's there to kill him with the pen. Saxon, who is a violent and reactive person, grabs the pen first and stabs Dexter in the shoulder. Dexter then takes the pen and stabs Saxon in the neck, killing him. All of this happens on the security camera. Batista and Quinn review the footage afterward. Batista seems genuinely baffled by what he's watching. He asked why Dexter was even in the holding cell. Dexter says he wanted to make sure the GSR test was done properly and wanted to look Saxon in the eye. Quinn calls it self-defense. Batista agrees. They cleared Dexter. A civilian forensic analyst entered a holding cell, brought a weapon, provoked a restrained suspect into attacking him, killed the suspect on camera, and walked out with a pat on the back. In any real police department, this would result in an internal affairs investigation lasting months. At Miami Metro, it takes about 3 minutes. And then there's the finale. A hurricane is bearing down on Miami. Deborah, who was shot by Saxon earlier in the season, suffers complications from surgery and is left brain dead on life support. Dexter walks into her hospital room, unplugs the life support, carries her body out of the hospital, puts her on his boat, and drives into the hurricane. I want to be very specific about what happens here. Dexter Morgan walks into a hospital during a natural disaster, disconnects a patient from life support equipment, carries her body through the building and out to the marina, loads her onto his boat, and motors out into a Category whatever hurricane. And nobody stops him. No doctors, no nurses, no security, nobody. He drops Deborah's body in the ocean, the same ocean where he dumped all his victims, which is a narrative choice I could write a whole separate essay about. And then he drives his boat into the eye of the hurricane, cut to black, then cut to a logging camp somewhere in Oregon. Dexter is alive. He's a lumberjack. He has a beard. He sits in a cabin and stares directly into the camera with dead eyes. The end. He abandoned his son with a fugitive in Argentina. He stole a corpse from a hospital. He drove into a hurricane. He survived. And he became a lumberjack. This is how one of the most acclaimed television shows of its era chose to end. I honestly don't even know where to start with how many bad decisions are packed into that finale. Leaving Harrison with Hannah, a known poisoner who's wanted by federal law enforcement, is probably the worst. Harrison is a toddler. He's already traumatized from sitting in his mother's blood as an infant. And Dexter's solution is to fake his own death and leave his son in the care of a woman who tried to kill his aunt. Father of the Year material. Let me actually break down the logistics of the finale for a second. Because when you lay them out step by step, the absurdity becomes almost surreal. First, Hannah and Harrison need to leave the country. Hannah is a wanted fugitive. Her face is all over the news. U.S. Marshal Clayton has been actively hunting her throughout Season 8. She hasn't disguised herself in any meaningful way. She still has the same hair, the same face, the same general appearance, and the plan is for her to board a bus to get to the airport. On the bus, she actually encounters Elway, a private investigator who has been hired to find her. He recognizes her immediately because of course he does, she looks exactly like her wanted photos. Hannah's solution is to inject him with M99, the same animal tranquilizer Dexter uses, which she apparently carries around in a thermos alongside tea. Elway passes out and Hannah and Harrison get off the bus in Daytona. She then somehow makes it to an international airport and leaves the country. Meanwhile, back in Miami, Dexter is dealing with Saxon, the hurricane, and Deborah's condition. The sequence of events in the finale is roughly as follows. Dexter kills Saxon in the holding cell with a pen. He visits Deborah in the hospital and discovers she's brain dead. He makes the decision to unplug her life support. He carries her body through the hospital. He loads her onto his boat at the marina. He drives into the hurricane. His boat is found destroyed. He's presumed dead. Every single step of this plan requires something impossible to happen. Nobody at the hospital stops him from unplugging a patient and carrying her body out of the building. Nobody at the marina questions why he's taking a boat out into a hurricane. The Coast Guard finds his destroyed boat and declares him dead without recovering a body, which in real life would not close an investigation. And somehow he survives the hurricane, makes it to shore, and establishes himself as a lumberjack in Oregon. The show never explains how he survived. It never explains how he got to Oregon. It never explains what happened to his identity, his records, his bank accounts, anything. One minute he's driving into a wall of wind and water. The next he's chopping trees and looking sad. It's like the writers ran out of time and just said, he's a lumberjack now, don't ask questions. And I think the reason the finale bothered people so much beyond the obvious plot issues is that it betrays the character. Dexter's one consistent redeeming quality throughout the series is his devotion to the people he loves. He loves Deborah. He loves Harrison. He's limited in his ability to express that love, and his actions consistently endanger the people he cares about. But the love itself is real. The show spent 8 seasons establishing that, and then in the finale, he abandons his son. He drops Deborah's body in the ocean like she's one of his victims, and he disappears. It's not a sacrifice. It's not a noble gesture. It's a man running away from the consequences of his choices, which is exactly what he's done in every season. Except this time, the show presents it as an ending rather than a temporary reprieve. I think this is also worth comparing to how New Blood handles Dexter's ending because the difference is stark. In the original finale, Dexter runs away and faces no consequences. In New Blood, Dexter is arrested, kills an innocent man, and is shot by his own son. The New Blood ending is brutal and painful, but it feels like the natural conclusion of everything the show has been building toward for 16 years. Actions have consequences. The people you hurt eventually stop forgiving you, and you can't outrun yourself. The original finale got the ending wrong because it let Dexter escape without paying for anything. New Blood got the ending right, or at least closer to right, because it forced him to pay for everything. The lumberjack stare is the worst kind of ending for a character like Dexter, not because it's dark, but because it's empty. There's no reckoning, no justice, no catharsis, just a guy with a beard staring into nothing while his son grows up on another continent. For nearly 8 years, that was the last image of Dexter Morgan. The fans were furious, the critics were baffled, the lumberjack memes flourished, and then in 2021, they brought him back. Let me also take a moment to talk about some of the supporting characters and their own contributions to the ongoing catastrophe that is Dexter's life. Because it's not just Dexter who makes terrible decisions. The people around him are almost impressively bad at their jobs, and their failures create the space for Dexter to operate. Vince Masuka is the forensic tech who works alongside Dexter for the entire original series. He's smart, he's qualified, and he has access to all the same evidence that Dexter does. He notices the blood slide discrepancies in Season 7. He notices when LaGuerta uses an outside lab. He finds the prosthetic hand. But he never connects the dots. He's too focused on inappropriate jokes and dating to look closely at the colleague sitting next to him. Angel Batista is a good detective with solid instincts, but he's also too trusting. He believes in Dexter because Dexter brings him donuts and speaks basic Spanish. When evidence points in uncomfortable directions, Angel tends to find reasons not to follow it. He's the kind of detective who catches the criminals who are obvious, but misses the one hiding in plain sight because that one is his friend. And then there's the Miami Metro Homicide Department as an institution. Throughout the series, this department suffers from spectacularly poor security, lax evidence handling, and a culture of looking the other way when things get uncomfortable. Dexter accesses the evidence locker without supervision in Season 8 to swap out Deborah's gun. He processes his own crime scenes in Season 5. He walks into holding cells to confront suspects in Season 8. He uses department resources to research his victims throughout the entire series. Nobody audits anything. Nobody reviews his access logs. Nobody questions why the blood spatter guy is always at the center of major cases. There's a reason fans sometimes joke that Miami Metro is the worst police department in fiction. It's not that the individual detectives are incompetent, although some of them are. It's that the institutional safeguards that should exist in any law enforcement agency simply don't. There are no checks and balances. There's no oversight, there's no accountability, and Dexter thrives in that vacuum. If Miami Metro had mandatory evidence audits, Dexter would have been caught in Season 1. If they had computer access monitoring, he would have been caught in Season 2. If they had security cameras in the evidence room, he would have been caught in Season 8. The show presents Dexter as a genius hiding in plain sight, but the reality is that he's hiding in a department where sight itself is optional, and that, honestly, might be the most damning thing about the whole franchise. Not that Dexter is dumb, although he frequently is, but that the system designed to catch people like him is even dumber. And for nearly 8 years, that was the end of Dexter. The lumberjack stare. The most memed, most mocked, most disappointing television conclusion anyone could remember. But in 2021, they brought him back. Dexter New Blood premiered on Showtime on November 7, 2021. It's a 10-episode limited series set roughly a decade after the original finale. Dexter has been living under the alias Jim Lindsay in a small town called Iron Lake in upstate New York. He works at a sporting goods store called Fred's Fish and Game. He's dating the local chief of police, Angela Bishop. He bowls on a recreational league. He hasn't killed anyone in close to 10 years. And I'll be honest, the setup is promising. The idea of Dexter trying to suppress his urges in a quiet, isolated community, far from the chaos of Miami, is actually compelling. He's not the same Dexter. He's older, calmer, and he's built a life that, for the first time, isn't constantly on the verge of collapse. He even has a hallucination of Deborah instead of Harry, which is a nice narrative shift. But this is a show about Dexter Morgan, and Dexter Morgan cannot stop making stupid decisions. So let's talk about how he blows up his entire new life in approximately 20 days. First, the Instagram problem. Dexter has been hiding successfully for nearly a decade under a fake name in a small town. Nobody in Iron Lake knows his real identity. He's kept his head down, avoided attention, and maintained a convincing cover. And then a guy named Fred from his bowling team posts a photo on Instagram bragging about Jim bowling a 300 game. Dexter allowed himself to be photographed by a teammate who then posted the photo on a public social media platform. A man in hiding from a faked death, from an entire previous life as a serial killer, from a son he abandoned. Let someone put his face on Instagram. His son Harrison, now a teenager who has been bouncing around foster homes since Hannah McKay died of pancreatic cancer, finds this photo while searching the internet for any trace of his father. Harrison tracks Jim Lindsay to Iron Lake. 10 years of successfully hiding. Destroyed by a bowling photo. I can't stress enough how avoidable this was. Don't join a bowling league, or if you do, don't let anyone take photos of you, or if someone takes photos, ask them not to post them online. Any of these steps would have prevented Harrison from finding him. But Dexter, living in a world where social media has existed for his entire adult life, apparently didn't consider the possibility that being photographed and tagged on Instagram might compromise his anonymity. And this brings up a broader point about Dexter's adaptation to the modern world. The original series ran from 2006 to 2013, a period when social media was still relatively new and not as pervasive as it became later. By the time of New Blood in 2021, we're in a world of Instagram, facial recognition, digital footprints everywhere. Dexter doesn't seem to have adjusted his operational security for this new reality at all. He uses a smartphone, he has a social circle, he goes to public events, he's living under a fake name, sure, but he hasn't changed his face, his habits, or his fundamental approach to anonymity. In 2006, you could disappear by moving to a new city and using a fake name. In 2021, you need a lot more than that. And Dexter is operating like the internet doesn't exist. When Harrison shows up at Dexter's cabin, there's an interesting dynamic that develops. Harrison is angry, profoundly, justifiably angry. His father abandoned him as a toddler, left him with a woman who wasn't even his biological parent, faked his own death, and never came back. Harrison grew up in foster homes after Hannah died of pancreatic cancer. He bounced around. Nobody wanted a troubled teenager, and the whole time his father was alive, bowling 300 games and dating the chief of police in a small town in New York. Dexter initially lies to Harrison's face, telling him he's not Dexter Morgan. He looks at his own son and denies his identity. Harrison says, "You look just like I remember." And Dexter still tries to maintain the lie. It takes the ghost of Deborah appearing in his mind and then the impulse killing of Matt Caldwell to shake Dexter out of his denial and bring Harrison into his home. This leads to one of the most interesting dynamics in the franchise. Dexter wants to believe that Harrison has a dark passenger, the same violent compulsion that Dexter has carried his entire life. Harrison was born in blood, just like Dexter was. He saw his mother murdered in the bathtub as an infant, mirroring how Dexter watched his mother killed in a shipping container. Dexter takes this parallel as evidence that Harrison is destined to follow in his footsteps. But here's the thing, Harrison's anger, while real and sometimes violent, isn't the same as Dexter's dark passenger. Harrison breaks a wrestling opponent's arm. He hurts Ethan, a troubled classmate, in a confrontation. He's volatile and explosive, but he's also grieving, abandoned, traumatized, and desperately searching for a parent. His violence looks more like the acting out of an abandoned teenager than the calculated compulsion of a budding serial killer. Dexter doesn't see this distinction. He's so eager to have a connection with his son and so convinced that his experience is universal that he starts teaching Harrison the code. He takes Harrison along when he kills Kurt Caldwell. He shows Harrison how to dismember a body. He treats Harrison's troubled behavior as confirmation of a shared identity rather than a cry for help. This is arguably Dexter's cruelest decision in the entire franchise. He has an opportunity to get his son professional help, to address the trauma, to give Harrison the normal life that Dexter himself never had. Instead, he recruits Harrison into his world. He shows him the kill room, he hands him a knife, and when Harrison recoils from the reality of what his father actually is, Dexter is surprised. But before we get to the ending, let me talk about the Matt Caldwell kill in more detail because the chain of events it sets off is almost comically bad in terms of decision-making. First, Dexter kills Matt in his shed, at his home. He then needs to dispose of the body, which in the frozen landscape of upstate New York is significantly harder than it was in subtropical Miami. He considers various options and eventually makes a 3-mile hike through the snow to an abandoned iron mine, hoping to dump the body there. But he encounters a bear inside the mine and has to abort. He eventually uses a local incinerator to burn the body. But as I mentioned earlier, he doesn't account for the titanium bone screw in Matt's leg. This is a man who has been a forensic analyst for his entire career. He knows about trace evidence, He knows about material science. And he doesn't think to check whether his victim had any surgical implants that might survive incineration. It's not like bone screws are obscure. They're incredibly common in anyone who's ever had orthopedic surgery, and Matt was a young, active, rich kid who played sports and got into accidents. A 2-minute search of Matt's medical history, or even just a visual inspection of his body, would have revealed the implant. And then there's the fire pit. Dexter uses the fire pit at his own cabin to burn some of the evidence, and that's where the bone screw ends up. At his home, where his police chief girlfriend investigates after Kurt burns the cabin down. The bone screw is basically a homing beacon that says Matt Caldwell was here at this address and was burned. The Kurt Caldwell situation adds another layer of complexity. Kurt is not just Matt's grieving father, he's a serial killer in his own right who has been kidnapping and murdering young women, mostly runaways, for years. He lures them to his truck stop, offers them shelter and warmth, then takes them to a remote cabin where he hunts them like animals and films the kills. He's been doing this for decades, and the cases show up in Angela's cold case files as missing Indigenous women from the area. When Dexter kills Matt, Kurt doesn't know who did it at first. He lies to Angela, claiming Matt is alive and that Matt FaceTimed him. This lie is transparently ridiculous, and both Dexter and Angela see through it for different reasons. But Kurt starts digging. He gets closer to the truth, and eventually he figures out that Jim Lindsay killed his son. Kurt's retaliation involves several things. He burns down Dexter's cabin, he has his henchman Elric Kane capture Dexter while Kurt lures Harrison to his cabin with the intention of killing him. Dexter barely escapes and rescues Harrison just in time, but the whole situation exists because Dexter impulsively killed Matt in a fit of rage and then failed to clean up after himself properly. I think the thing that makes New Blood's version of Dexter's mistakes feel different from the original series is that he's supposed to have learned. He's had a decade to reflect. He knows what happened to Rita, to Deborah, to everyone who got close to him. He's been living a quiet, kill-free life. And within weeks of his first relapse, he's right back to making the same errors. Impulsive kills, sloppy disposal, romantic entanglement with someone who could expose him. Failure to account for forensic evidence. It's like watching someone fall off the wagon in the most dramatic way possible, except instead of alcohol, it's murder. This is also where I want to mention something about Angela Bishop specifically, because she represents something important in the franchise. Angela is the first investigator who actually catches Dexter through genuine detective work, rather than stumbling into the truth by accident or being told by someone else. Dokes figured it out through instinct and surveillance, but he was killed before he could prove anything. Lundy suspected the truth but was overruled and then murdered. LaGuardia pieced it together but was killed by Deborah. Deborah walked in on a kill and was told directly. None of these people caught Dexter through a traditional investigation that led to an arrest. Angela does. She starts with missing persons cases. She notices connections to Jim Lindsay. She discovers the real Dexter Morgan through internet research. She finds the ketamine connection. She finds the bone screw. She conducts interviews. She builds a case, and she arrests him at his own dinner table, with his son watching. It's messy and it happens quickly, but it's the first time in the entire franchise that the system actually works the way it's supposed to. Someone investigates, someone follows the evidence, someone makes an arrest, and the fact that it takes a small-town police chief in upstate New York to do what the entire Miami Metro Homicide Department couldn't manage in over a decade is, I think, the show's quiet commentary on institutional failure. But Dexter can't accept the consequences of being caught. He never could. He tells Harrison he doesn't know what he's talking about. Harrison stares at him and says, "You look just like I remember." Eventually, Dexter admits the truth and they begin an awkward, painful process of reconnecting. But the real problems start with Matt Caldwell. Matt is the son of Kurt Caldwell, a local power broker and the secret villain of the season. Matt is a spoiled, reckless, entitled rich kid who, earlier in the story, caused a fatal boat crash while intoxicated and got away with it because his father covered for him. He's not a good person, but he's not exactly a serial killer either. One day, while Dexter's out in the woods running his morning routine of chasing after a rare white deer, the deer stops and lets Dexter approach. It's a beautiful moment. Man and nature. Peace. And then Matt Caldwell bursts onto the scene and shoots the deer dead, spraying Dexter with its blood. Dexter snaps. He knocks Matt unconscious with his own rifle, and then he decides to kill him. This is impulsive. It's emotional. The code is technically satisfied because Matt has killed before, the boat crash. But the decision to kill him isn't driven by the code. It's driven by rage over a dead deer. Dexter hasn't killed anyone in almost 10 years, and he falls off the wagon because someone shot an animal in front of him. Now here's where it gets really dumb. Dexter sets up a kill room in his own shed, attached to his cabin, in a town of about 500 people where everyone knows everyone and his girlfriend is the chief of police. He covers the walls in plastic, lays Matt on a table, and goes through his ritual. He even makes a blood slide out of broken glass because he doesn't have proper supplies. He then has to figure out how to dispose of the body. In Miami, this was easy. He had the ocean. In Iron Lake, the ground is frozen solid. Burial isn't an option. He considers the local incinerator, but getting there is a risky multi-mile hike through the snow. He eventually burns the body, but he doesn't account for one critical detail. Matt Caldwell has a titanium bone screw in his leg from a previous surgery. Titanium doesn't burn. Not in a standard incinerator, not in a fire pit. The bone screw survives. And when Kurt Caldwell later burns down Dexter's cabin in retaliation for what he suspects happened to his son, Angela Bishop sifts through the rubble and finds the titanium bone screw in the fire pit remains. A forensic analyst, a man who has spent his career understanding how evidence persists, didn't account for surgical implants surviving fire at his own home, where his girlfriend, the police chief, would naturally investigate any suspicious fire. But the stupidity doesn't stop there. Dexter is dating Angela Bishop, the chief of police of the town where he's now killed someone. Angela is a good cop. She's smart, she's thorough, and she's deeply invested in solving a string of cold cases involving missing women in the Iron Lake area. As the season progresses, Angela starts pulling threads. She looks into Jim Lindsay and discovers connections to Dexter Morgan. She finds out about the Bay Harbor butcher. She starts looking at injection marks on Matt Caldwell's body and connects them to Dexter's past. In Season 4, Dexter's downfall came from befriending a serial killer. In New Blood, his downfall comes from dating a cop. It's the same fundamental mistake, putting himself in close proximity to the one person most likely to uncover his secret, but dressed up in a new context. Dexter didn't learn the lesson, he just found a different way to make the same error. The season also brings Kurt Caldwell, played by Clancy Brown, into focus as the real villain. Kurt has been kidnapping and murdering young women for years, luring runaways to his truck stop and then hunting them in a ritualistic process that involves filming their deaths. He's Iron Lake's own hidden monster, operating right under Angela's nose. When Kurt figures out that Dexter killed Matt, he begins a campaign of retaliation, culminating in an attempt to capture Dexter and force him to watch while Kurt kills Harrison. Dexter rescues Harrison just in time, kills Kurt's henchman, and then later kills Kurt himself in a proper kill room setup. He and Harrison dismember and bury Kurt's body together. And for a brief moment, it seems like father and son might actually bond over their shared darkness. But Harrison is troubled by what he's seen. He initially compares Dexter to Batman, a vigilante who takes out the people the system misses. But the more he learns about his father's actual methods and motivations, the more disturbed he becomes. The kill isn't clean heroism, it's ritual, it's compulsion, it's personal. Things fall apart quickly in the finale. Angela arrests Dexter at his own dinner table, pulling a gun on him in front of Harrison and her daughter Audrey. She's connected enough dots, the Bay Harbor butcher case, the ketamine, the bone screw, Matt Caldwell's disappearance to bring him in. Dexter is locked in a holding cell at the Iron Lake police station. And here, Dexter makes his final and arguably worst decision. He needs to escape. When Sergeant Logan, Harrison's wrestling coach and a genuinely good person, brings Dexter water, Dexter grabs him through the bars. He bashes Logan's face against the metal. He puts him in a chokehold. He tells Logan he doesn't want to hurt him, he just wants the keys. But Logan doesn't reach for the keys. He reaches for his gun, and Dexter, in the struggle, snaps his neck. Logan dies. An innocent man, a man who mentored Harrison, a man who had nothing to do with any of Dexter's darkness, killed because Dexter needed to escape the consequences of his own choices. This is the kill that finally, permanently breaks Harrison's faith in his father. When Dexter escapes and finds Harrison, telling him they need to leave immediately, Harrison has already heard that Logan is dead. He knows what his father did, and he knows that Logan didn't fit the code. Harrison asks Dexter if he killed Logan. Dexter says it was an accident. Harrison doesn't believe him. Or more accurately, he believes that Dexter would always find a reason, always have an excuse, and that the people around Dexter would never stop dying. Dexter looks at his son. He sees something he's never seen before. Someone who loves him and is choosing not to accept him. Not out of ignorance, not out of denial, but out of a clear understanding of what Dexter is. Dexter asks Harrison to shoot him, and Harrison, with tears in his eyes, does. Dexter Morgan dies in the snow in Iron Lake, New York, shot by his own son. The culmination of every bad decision, every dropped blood slide, every I can have a normal life delusion, every impulse followed, every rule broken. The man who thought he could control everything couldn't even control his own ending. Or at least that's how it seemed, because in July of 2025, Dexter Resurrection premiered on Paramount Plus with Showtime, revealing that Dexter somehow survived being shot in the chest and was being kept alive in secret. A second season was ordered in October 2025. And there's even an announced prequel series about the Trinity Killer's early life in the 1970s. So apparently, even death can't stop this franchise, or this man's terrible decision-making, but that's a story for another night. Now, before we start winding down for the night, I want to step back and look at the bigger picture. Because when you lay out all of Dexter's mistakes across 8 seasons, 10 episodes of New Blood, and the broader franchise, some really clear patterns emerge. And honestly, I think these patterns are what make the show so fascinating even when the writing stumbles. Dexter's flaws aren't random. They're systematic. They repeat in predictable cycles. And if you understand the patterns, you can see every disaster coming from a mile away. The first and biggest pattern is the trophy compulsion. This is the thread that runs through literally everything. From the very first episode, where Dexter slides that glass slide off Mike Donovan's cheek, to the final season of New Blood, where he makes an improvised slide from broken glass in his shed, Dexter cannot stop taking trophies from his kills. In Season 2, the blood slides almost expose him when Doak steals them. In Season 6, a drop slide leads Lagerta to reopen the Bay Harbor butcher case. In Season 7, the full collection in his apartment is what forces Deborah to confront him. In Season 7, Episode 4, after killing Speltzer in a crematorium, Dexter actually has a moment of self-awareness. He says, "Normally now is when I'd slice your cheek with my scalpel and get a drop of blood to remember you by. But I can't risk anyone finding a blood slide ever again. I do things different now. The memory of killing you will have to be enough." He even burns his second blood slide box in the crematorium along with Speltzer's body. For about 5 minutes, it seems like Dexter has learned, but the impulse never truly dies. It's like an addiction within an addiction. His need to kill is the primary compulsion, and the trophy-taking is a secondary compulsion layered on top of it. Even after he swears off slides, the behavior resurfaces in New Blood when he takes 2 pieces of broken glass and presses Matt Caldwell's blood between them. Old habits, as they say. What makes this particularly frustrating from a viewer's perspective is that Dexter is a forensic scientist. He has spent his entire professional career explaining to detectives how biological evidence connects perpetrators to crime scenes. He knows better than almost anyone alive how DNA evidence works, how blood typing can narrow suspects, how a single drop of blood at a crime scene can unravel an entire investigation. And he voluntarily, repeatedly creates exactly this type of evidence and stores it in his home. It's like a firefighter who collects matches as a hobby and keeps them next to the gas cans in his garage. The second major pattern is what I think of as the I can have it all delusion. Every season, Dexter convinces himself that he can balance his dark life and his normal life. He can be a killer and a boyfriend. He can be a murderer and a husband. He can be a vigilante and a father. The code, in his mind, is the bridge between these two worlds. As long as he follows the rules, he can walk in both and nobody gets hurt. And every season, the show proves him wrong. With Rita, the balance works for a while, but the moment Dexter prioritizes his killing life over his family life, by spending time with Trinity instead of being with his wife and kids, Rita dies. With Lumen, the partnership works temporarily because they're both processing the same darkness, but once Lumen heals, she leaves, and Dexter's alone again. With Hannah McKay, the relationship is doomed from the start because Hannah is a fugitive who literally poisons Dexter's sister. And with Angela Bishop in New Blood, dating the chief of police while killing people in her jurisdiction is a level of hubris that borders on self-sabotage. Every single person Dexter gets close to either dies, gets traumatized, or ends up worse off for having known him. Rita is murdered. Deborah is destroyed psychologically and eventually killed. Stokes is framed and killed. La Guerta is murdered. Lumen has to flee. Hannah becomes a permanent fugitive. Angela has to arrest the man she loves. Even Harrison, his own son, is so damaged by Dexter's choices that he ends up shooting his father in the chest. Harry tells Dexter this repeatedly through his ghostly appearances. You can't have both, Deborah tells him. Vogel tells him. The show tells him through the body count of everyone who gets close to him. And Dexter never, not once across the entire franchise, genuinely accepts this truth until the very end when Harrison is standing in front of him with a rifle. The third pattern is impulsivity masquerading as intelligence. Dexter is presented as methodical. He has a code, a ritual, a process. He's supposedly careful and strategic, but look at the actual decisions he makes when emotions are involved and the pattern completely breaks down. He kills Rankin in a gas station bathroom on a whim. He kills Matt Caldwell because a deer got shot. He befriends Trinity out of curiosity. He falls for Hannah because she's exciting and dangerous. He saves Trinity's life on the roof because of an impulse. He drops blood slides because he's distracted. He forgets to check for surgical implants because he's out of practice. The Code of Harry was designed to prevent exactly these situations. It's a system of checks and balances meant to keep Dexter's darker impulses from overriding his rational mind. Rule 1, don't get caught. Rule 2, only kill people who deserve it. Rule 3, be absolutely certain of their guilt. These are practical, cautious guidelines, and as the series progresses, Dexter follows them less and less. In Season 1, Dexter is meticulous. He researches his targets. He plans his kills. He has backup plans for his backup plans. By Season 8, he's killing people in holding cells with ballpoint pens on camera and walking away like nothing happened. The deterioration is gradual, but it's unmistakable. Each season chips away a little more of the discipline that the code was supposed to enforce, until what's left is just a man with violent urges and bad judgment making increasingly desperate choices. The fourth pattern, and this is maybe the most important one, is the incompetence of the people around him. Dexter survives not because he's brilliant, but because he operates in an environment where the people who should be catching him consistently fail to do their jobs. Think about it. Dokes, the one person at Miami Metro who has the instincts and the persistence to identify Dexter as a killer, gets imprisoned and killed. Frank Lundy, the FBI's best investigator, correctly suspects the Bay Harbor butcher is still at large, but gets overruled by his superiors and then shot dead by Trinity's daughter. Lagerta figures out the truth about Dexter and is murdered by Deborah before she can act on it. Quinn develops real suspicions, but is too compromised by his own ethical failings to follow through. Even Masuka, who finds the prosthetic hand and notices the blood slide discrepancies, never quite connects the dots. The only person who actually catches Dexter, who follows the evidence to its logical conclusion and holds him accountable, is Angela Bishop in New Blood, and she's the character from the furthest edge of the franchise, a small-town police chief in upstate New York, not a member of the elite Miami Metro homicide team that Dexter worked alongside for over a decade. That says something pretty damning about the competence of the Miami Metro Department. Now, to be fair to the show, this is partly intentional. The writers wanted to explore how a person like Dexter could hide in plain sight, and the answer is that the system has blind spots. People don't suspect their coworkers, they don't question the quiet guy who brings donuts. They assume that the person analyzing blood spatter couldn't possibly be the one creating it. There's even a moment in season 1 where Dexter himself muses about this, wondering why Dokes is the only person in a building full of cops who gets the creeps from him. The answer is that people see what they want to see, and what they want to see is a normal, harmless forensics nerd. But there is a difference between saying, the system has blind spots, and saying, nobody in this entire police department noticed anything for 12 years. At a certain point, Dexter's survival requires the people around him to be not just unsuspecting, but actively obtuse. And that's a weakness of the show, even in its best seasons. The man kept a trophy box in his air conditioning unit. He used the same ocean dump site for a decade. He quoted murderers to suspicious cops. He left blood slides at crime scenes. He dated the police chief while killing people in her town. The fact that he wasn't caught sooner isn't a testament to his genius. It's an indictment of everyone else. There's a fifth pattern worth talking about too, and it has to do with season 3, which I skipped over earlier, so let me circle back to it briefly. In season 3, Dexter befriends Miguel Prado, an assistant district attorney who discovers Dexter's secret, and instead of being horrified, wants in on the action. Miguel starts killing people on his own, but without any of the code's restrictions. He kills a woman named Ellen Wolf because she was a professional rival, not because she was a murderer. Dexter trusted someone he shouldn't have, handed them the keys to his world, and then had to deal with the consequences when they went off the rails. Sound familiar? It should, because it's the exact same mistake Dexter makes with Lila in season 2. With Lumen in season 5, with Hannah in season 7, and arguably with Dr. Vogel in season 8. Dexter keeps letting people into his secret life. He keeps trusting people with information that could destroy him. And every single time it goes badly. With Lila, the result was the cabin explosion and Doke's death. With Miguel, it was an innocent woman's murder, and a confrontation that nearly exposed Dexter to the Prado family. With Lumen, it was a season of near misses and a final scene where Deborah almost pulled back the curtain. With Hannah, it was Deborah getting poisoned and nearly killed. With Vogel, it was her son slitting her throat. Dexter Morgan is, at his core, a man who can't be alone. Despite claiming to be a sociopath, despite his internal monologue about faking all human interactions, despite the endless narration about how he's empty inside, Dexter craves connection. He wants a partner. He wants someone who knows the real him and accepts it. And that need, more than any single decision or mistake, is what consistently puts him and everyone around him in danger. Harry knew this. That's why the code includes the directive to keep the secret, not just from the police, not just from civilians, but from everyone. Harry understood that the moment Dexter shares his truth with another person, he gives that person power over him. Power to expose him, to manipulate him, to make demands of him. And Dexter, despite being taught this lesson as a child, ignores it repeatedly because he wants to feel less alone. It's actually kind of heartbreaking when you frame it that way. Here's a man who was traumatized as a toddler, raised by a well-meaning but arguably misguided cop, who channeled his son's violent impulses into a system for controlled killing, and left alone in a world where the only person who truly understood him died before he reached adulthood. Of course he keeps reaching out. Of course he keeps trying to find someone who can see him clearly and still care about him. The tragedy is that every time he finds that person, the relationship destroys one or both of them. Deborah saw him clearly. It destroyed her. Hannah saw him clearly. It made her a permanent fugitive. Harrison saw him clearly. It made him pull the trigger. The pattern is unbreakable. Not because Dexter is stupid, not really, but because the thing that makes him human, his need for connection, is fundamentally incompatible with the thing that makes him a monster. He can't have both. Harry was right. Deborah was right. And it took the entire series, a revival, and a bullet from his own son's rifle for Dexter to finally accept it. I want to add one more observation before we start wrapping up, because I think it ties everything together. Throughout the series, there's a slow but unmistakable deterioration of the code itself. In Season 1, the code is sacrosanct. Dexter follows it meticulously. Rule 1, don't get caught. Rule 2, only kill those who deserve it. Rule 3, be absolutely certain. Rule 4, fake normal. These rules aren't just guidelines for Dexter, they're his religion. They're the structure that keeps his darkness contained and directed. But as the seasons progress, the code erodes. In Season 3, Dexter teaches the code to Miguel Prado, who promptly misuses it. In Season 4, Dexter bends the code by befriending Trinity instead of killing him immediately. In Season 5, he extends the code to include Lumen as a killing partner, something Harry never intended. In Season 6, he drops blood slides and kills impulsively on a trip to Nebraska. In Season 7, he refuses to kill Hannah McKay, even though she fits the code perfectly. In Season 8, he kills Saxon in a holding cell in what amounts to premeditated self-defense, a category the code doesn't really address. By New Blood, the code is barely a whisper. Dexter kills Matt Caldwell in a rage over a dead deer. He sets up a kill room in his own home. He teaches Harrison the code's basics, but doesn't enforce them rigorously. And when he kills Sergeant Logan, an innocent man with no connection to any crime, the code is officially dead. There is no version of Harry's rules that permits the killing of an innocent person to facilitate escape. Logan's death is the final proof that the code was never a moral framework. It was a coping mechanism. And like all coping mechanisms, it failed under enough pressure. I think Harry understood this before anyone else. That's why he killed himself. He saw that the code wasn't making Dexter better. It was making him more efficient. It wasn't controlling the darkness. It was giving the darkness a permission structure. And once that structure started to crack, there was nothing underneath it except the raw compulsion to kill. This is what makes the final scene between Dexter and Harrison in New Blood so meaningful. Harrison isn't just rejecting his father. He's rejecting the code. He's saying, I see what this system produces, and I don't want any part of it. Dexter's legacy isn't the people he killed or the people he saved. It's the people he destroyed simply by being near them. And Harrison, standing in the snow with a rifle, is the first person in Dexter's life who sees that clearly and acts on it. Whether the franchise continues to honor that moment or undermines it with resurrection remains to be seen. But for now, in the context of everything we've discussed tonight, it feels like the right ending for this chapter. Not happy, not satisfying in a conventional sense, but right. So after all of that, after 8 seasons, 96 episodes, 10 episodes of New Blood, and a franchise that's still going, what's the takeaway? Is Dexter Morgan a genius or an idiot? Before I give my answer to that, let me try to rank what I think are the absolute dumbest individual decisions Dexter makes across the entire franchise. Because after going through everything we've talked about tonight, I think there's a pretty clear hierarchy. At the very top, I'd put the decision to befriend Arthur Mitchell and delay killing him in Season 4. This single choice, born entirely from curiosity and vanity, directly resulted in Rita's death and Harrison's trauma. Dexter had multiple clean opportunities to kill Trinity, and he passed on every one of them because he wanted to learn the secret of balancing murder and fatherhood. The answer, it turned out, was that there is no secret. Trinity's family lived in terror, and by the time Dexter figured that out, it was too late. Second, I'd put the bloodslides, not any one specific bloodslide incident, but the entire practice across all seasons. From the very first episode to New Blood, Dexter's trophy compulsion created evidence that threatened to expose him over and over again. The Bay Harbor Butcher Graveyard might have been the thing that brought the investigation, but the bloodslides are what kept it alive and eventually reopened it. If Dexter had never started collecting trophies, La Guerta would have had nothing to work with in Season 7, and she might still be alive. Third, the ocean dump site, using the same disposal location for years, is so fundamentally stupid that it doesn't even require elaborate analysis. Bury your roots, the ocean is enormous. That's it. That's the entire lesson. Fourth, the Season 6 church kill and the drop bloodslide. This one is particularly painful because it combines so many failures at once. Killing a victim in a semi-public building without securing the entrances, getting caught by his sister, improvising a cover-up that involved arson, and then leaving behind the one piece of physical evidence that would link him to the Bay Harbor Butcher. It's a 4-layer cake of catastrophe. Fifth, killing Sergeant Logan in New Blood. This is the decision that destroys Dexter's relationship with Harrison, violates the code beyond any possible justification, and proves that under enough pressure, Dexter will kill anyone, regardless of innocence. It's also the decision that makes his death feel earned rather than tragic. After that, you could slot in the Lila G. P.S. debacle, the Rankin bathroom kill, the Hannah McKay relationship, the Instagram bowling photo, and the bone screw oversight in whatever order feels right to you. They're all contenders for the all-time worst decisions list, and they all share the same root cause. Dexter's emotional impulses override his rational mind at the worst possible moments. I think the honest answer is that he's both a genius and an idiot, and that's what makes him one of the most compelling characters in television history. He's brilliant in moments, genuinely brilliant. His understanding of blood spatter analysis is real. His ability to read people when he's actually paying attention is exceptional. His capacity to maintain a double life for as long as he did requires a kind of sustained performance that borders on superhuman. For over a decade, he worked alongside homicide detectives, attended family dinners, raised children, maintained friendships, and murdered dozens of people without anyone except Dokes getting a genuine read on him. That's not nothing, but his intelligence has a ceiling, and that ceiling is emotion. Every time Dexter makes a decision based on curiosity, desire, loneliness, rage, or love, he makes the wrong call. Every time he deviates from the code because something feels right in the moment, someone gets hurt. His IQ is high, his EQ is catastrophically low. And in a profession where one mistake means prison or death, emotional intelligence is arguably more important than raw smarts. If you think about it, the show is basically a long, slow argument against the idea that intelligence alone is enough. Dexter has every advantage. He works inside the system that would prosecute him. He has access to forensic databases, police scanners, evidence rooms, and crime scene information. He has the knowledge to avoid every trap, clean every scene, and evade every investigation. And he still gets caught. Not once, but multiple times, because he can't control the parts of himself that have nothing to do with intellect. There's a line in Season 7 where Deborah says to Dexter, "You said it yourself, that you can't stop, that you don't want to stop." And if you keep doing this, you're like a fucking magnet. Bad shit is gonna find you. Dexter's response is, and if that happens, I'll handle it. Deborah shoots back, you were too late for Rita. And Dexter says, I should have killed Trinity the first time I saw him. That's the mistake I made. And Deborah says, that's the mistake that you made? With this tone of complete disbelief. Because Deborah understands what Dexter doesn't. The mistake isn't the timing. The mistake is the life. The mistake is thinking you can control chaos. The mistake is believing that a code, a set of rules, can somehow make serial murder compatible with human connection. Dexter never fully gets this until the very end. In New Blood, when Harrison is standing in front of him with a rifle, Dexter finally sees what everyone else has been seeing for decades. He's not a monster who learned to be human. He's a human who chose to be a monster and kept insisting that the choice didn't have consequences. That's the real tragedy of the show. Not that Dexter is evil, because the show goes out of its way to demonstrate that he isn't. Not entirely. He loves Deborah, he loves Harrison, he loved Rita in his own limited way. He's capable of genuine human feeling. The tragedy is that every time he acts on those feelings, every time he reaches for something normal and good, the violence of his other life crashes through and destroys it. Rita, Deborah, LaGuerta, Dokes, Logan, even Harry, who killed himself because he couldn't live with what he'd helped create. The body count of people destroyed by Dexter's choices includes almost everyone he ever cared about. And now, with Dexter Resurrection, the franchise is asking us to believe that there's more to the story. That Dexter survived Harrison's bullet. That there are more chapters to write. Whether those chapters involve more bad decisions, more dropped blood slides, more relationships doomed by proximity to Dexter's darkness, I guess we'll find out. I do want to mention a few things about the franchise going forward for anyone who's interested. Dexter Resurrection premiered on July 11, 2025 on Paramount Plus with Showtime. A second season was officially ordered in October 2025. The show picks up after New Blood and deals with Dexter's survival and whatever comes next. There's also been an announcement about a Trinity Killer prequel series that will focus on Arthur Mitchell's early life and first murders in the 1970s, which honestly sounds fantastic. And Dexter Original Sin, the prequel about young Dexter, ran for one season of 10 episodes from December 2024 to February 2025, but was canceled in August 2025 despite initially being renewed. So the Dexter universe is very much alive and growing. Whether the new shows will give Dexter better decision-making skills remains to be seen. Based on the evidence of the last 2 decades, I wouldn't bet on it. And that, my friends, is where we'll end tonight. We've been through the dump sites, the blood slides, the Trinity disaster, the gas station bathroom, Lila and the GPS, the Doomsday debacle, Deborah's heartbreak, Hannah's poison, the pen kill, the lumberjack, the Instagram bowling photo, the bone screw, and the final bullet in the snow. 2 hours of Dexter Morgan being the smartest idiot on television. In a future video, I'd love to go deeper into some of the things we didn't have time for tonight. The supporting characters and their own spectacular failures, Masuka's obliviousness, Quinn's compromised investigations, the complete institutional failure of Miami Metro as a functioning police department. Maybe a deep dive into every villain and what made them tick. Or a full lore video on the Dark Passenger and what it really means across the different series. There's so much material in this franchise that we've barely scratched the surface. I also think there's a really interesting video to be made about the women in Dexter's life and how each of them represents a different aspect of what he's trying and failing to be. Rita represents normalcy, the dream of a white picket fence that he clings to even though he knows it's built on lies. Lila represents unchecked chaos, the version of himself without rules or restraint. Lumen represents shared darkness, the fantasy of a partner who truly understands him. Hannah represents acceptance, someone who sees the real Dexter and stays anyway. And Angela represents consequence, the first person who loves him and also holds him accountable. Each relationship follows the same arc. Dexter meets someone, he lets them in. They discover something about who he really is. And then everything falls apart, usually violently. It's the same story told 5 different ways with escalating consequences each time. There's also the Dexter Original Sin prequel, which ran from December 2024 to February 2025 and explored young Dexter's first kills. It ran for 10 episodes before being canceled in August 2025, despite an earlier renewal. I didn't cover it much tonight because our focus was on the original series and New Blood, but there are some interesting moments in Original Sin where we see Dexter's earliest mistakes. He steals earrings from his first victim, Nurse Mary, as a trophy, and those earrings nearly expose him when Deborah gives them to a friend. It's the precursor to the bloodslide compulsion, and it shows that even as a young man, Dexter was making the same fundamental error, taking something from the scene, keeping evidence, letting his ritual override his survival instincts. The fact that he didn't learn the lesson with the earrings and instead graduated to an even riskier type of trophy with the blood slides tells you everything you need to know about Dexter's capacity for self-improvement. He doesn't learn, he adapts the form of his mistakes but never addresses the substance of them. But that's for another night. For now, I hope this was a good one to drift off to. If you're still awake, thanks for sticking around for the whole thing. If you fell asleep somewhere around the Trinity Killer section, that's totally fine too. That's the whole point. Stay safe and sweet dreams. Oh, and one more thing before I go. If you're wondering whether any of Dexter's dumb decisions are actually defensible when you think about them, like maybe the Trinity befriending made sense from a certain angle, or maybe the blood slides were justified because they helped him maintain psychological stability, I actually think there's a case to be made for a few of them, but that case falls apart the moment you factor in the consequences. Intent doesn't matter when the result is a dead wife, a traumatized son, a destroyed sister, and a trail of bodies stretching from Miami to Iron Lake. Good reasons for bad decisions are still bad decisions. And that, I think, is the final word on Dexter Morgan, a man with good reasons for everything he did and bad outcomes for almost all of it. Okay, now I'm actually done. For real this time. Good night.